Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our September meeting of Somerset Council Executive. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the meeting and to remind you that only the Executive League members present in the room are taking decisions at this meeting. Others in attendance are here to provide advice. There are no planned fire drills today, and in the event of a fire alarm, please follow the fire exit signs and congregate in the car park. If anyone present needs assistance in exiting the building, then please let one of the Democratic Services team know. The agenda and papers have been published on the Council website in advance of the meeting, and the Council recognises the importance of striking a balance between providing opportunities for lawful expression of views and any unacceptable behaviours or action that causes disruption that can lead to the meeting being adjourned. The Council that will be making a recording of the meeting, which we published in due course. Today's meeting will be run using a hybrid format. The Executive League members and key officers are physically present here in the John Meikle room at Dean House in Taunton, and other elected members and officers may physically or remotely join the meeting to speak on specific agenda items or to observe. The meeting is being broadcast, and therefore other members of the public and partners can observe the meeting remotely. Those of you who are online, please use the meeting chat function only for purposes of the meeting, and please use the hands up function to indicate that you wish to speak. If you are able to, please only speak at the chair's invitation and say your name before speaking, and please ensure that all microphones and cameras are turned off when not speaking. Just to take the opportunity to note that there have been recent changes to the executive membership. I'd particularly like to thank Councillors Ros Wyke and Councillor Dixie Larch and Tom Deacon for their contributions over their time of service, and would welcome the addition of Councillor Mike Rigby and Councillor Graham Oakes, though they have both sent apologies, so they are not here to appreciate the welcome. I will make sure it's particularly warm next time. Also, welcome to Maria Christophe. It's her first meeting of the executive as our Section 151 officer. Welcome, Maria. So apologies for absence. I've already mentioned Councillor Mike Rigby and Councillor Graham Oakes. Are there any other apologies for absence? Not seeing any. Thank you. And so we move on to the meetings held on August the 5th. We have draft minutes from the meeting held to consider. Are there any comments or observations on either the public or confidential section of those minutes? Not seeing anything. Do I have a proposer and seconder? Those Councillor Leyshon, seconded Councillor Shearer. Those in favour, those against, that's clearly carried, and I will sign duly. Can I ask if there are any declarations of interest in items on the agenda today? Again, not seeing any. And public question time. I'm advised that there are no questions from members of the public today, which brings us on to the executive forward plan. This is circulated. Are there any comments or questions on the forward plan, please? Not seeing anything from executive members. Anything from any other members? Not seeing anything. Nothing online. Okay. So we're just asked to note that doesn't need a formal proposal. So we move on to item 6, which is the target operating model, which is pages 19 to 46 on your hymn sheets. And I'd like to invite Councillor Theobald Philip to introduce.
Thank you very much, Chair. We're making excellent progress, but I hope we'll spend a little bit longer on this than we have on the previous items. I'm pleased to introduce the new target operating model. We're asking the executive to agree it and to delegate authority to Alan Jones in consultation with me to make any further final amendments to it. The target operating model is a fundamental tool in the successful delivery of our council plan through the improvement and transformation programme, enabling us to challenge ourselves, to challenge our proposals and the way that we work against it, to ensure that we continue to move forward towards our vision of one organisation and not away from it. It's not a radical step change, but builds on the already agreed vision and priorities for the council plan, our organisational design principles, and the values and behaviours. However, the target operating model will only be as successful as the support it receives, and therefore it is paramount that everyone on this executive, everyone working for Somerset Council, all members, understand it and are signed up to it. I will now hand over to Rachel Dixon, who's going to explain more.
Thank you, Councillor Butt-Philip. Apologies, the technology in front of me is not working this morning. So all I wanted to do this morning is just run through a little bit about the consultation that we've done with the target operator model, just so that everyone understands who has been involved, because it certainly isn't just myself. What we did first is we engaged with a group of subject matter experts for each of the sections within the target operator model. So we have had officers from governance, from ICT, from digital, data, business intelligence and HR and OD. They've all remained involved as we've ran through over the period of several months now as we've been building on the target operator model. From the beginning, we've also had an officer from comms involved to make sure that the language is easy to understand, because that's something that's quite important to me and those that are working on this. This is not just a management tool. This is something that we want the whole organisation to be using and understanding. We then set up a volunteer service director working group. So there was a key set of service directors that got involved. They were mobilised. They helped us build the content. They helped us understand how we could use it in the organisation, which was incredibly helpful. After that, we took the TOM to our leadership team and executive for feedback. So we did that through SLT meetings, CLT meetings. We came to informal executive as well. And these were all intended to ask for feedback and refine further. After that, we did a staff focus group, which was really, really positive. So essentially, we asked again for volunteers. I went out to different staff networks to make sure that we had good coverage of different members of our organisation to help us have a look at the TOM and say, what do you think of this? How can you use this? Do you understand it? And really help me build it a little bit further so that it can be used. And what was really interesting is that 86% of people that participated could already see how their service could use it. And that was without much prior knowledge from myself. So that's really helpful to understand. Following that, we also did some all-member briefing packs. So the TOM was included in a all-member briefing pack on the 22nd. And then we did one specifically for the TOM on the 14th. And we also attended scrutiny very recently. And again, feedback there. We had some comments, but in all, I feel like it was very positive. There was nothing that made me think, oh, we need to make a change here. So that's very good. I'm happy to go into any more detail on that if anyone wishes. Otherwise, I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Rachel. First of all, members of the executive, anyone wish to comment? Councillor Wakefield, Councillor Wilkins. Sarah.
Yes, thank you. I found the explanations we've had in various meetings, and again this morning, quite helpful in this. I have to say, and I'm just going to say this on behalf of everybody, I was one of the people who thought a target operating model was a structure chart. So it's been interesting to find out that I was obviously completely wrong about that, although I think a structure chart will one day follow. And I understand that these are the principles that we will use to help us design that and to design the way people work. So I think that's really helpful. I couldn't see, just quickly looking through the report, that it's been to scrutiny yet. I'm not sure if it has, but perhaps you can comment on that. And is there any sense of when we will eventually get to a point where we can see a shape that we can put our hands on, because this isn't a shape, this is an aspiration, which is all very well, and I like that, but I'd like to see a shape at some point.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Wakefield. So I'd just first like to say that we have been to scrutiny last week. So we did go to scrutiny, and as I said, the feedback there was quite positive. There was a few minor things, and something you said kind of has triggered me to say that this is a living document, so it isn't sign off today, and that's how it remains. So there was some comments specifically on the measures of success, which I'd just like to highlight is we know it's in draft. So these sort of things, as we understand more about the improvement and transformation programme, as change proposals come in, it will improve, and we will take that on board. I'd like to defer the questions over to Alan, if that's okay.
Thanks, Rachel. To answer the question, we clearly, in terms of delivering the new structure by March 25, we need to ensure that we are really clear on what those changes are likely to be, but also importantly, if there are any likely impacts on service delivery as a result of those structures. In order to achieve that, we need to go through that consultation with staff, but importantly with executive and all members. We'd like to commence that subject to the validation process being complete during the latter end of September and the beginning of October, in order to hit the budget dates that have been set for March 25. Clearly, there's a risk in that we need to ensure that the work that we're doing is validated, but also it does realise the savings that we envisage as part of the plan. So that is our indicative date at the moment, and we're all working hard to achieve it.
Thank you. Richard Wilkins next, and then Heather Shearer.
Thank you. I think you've actually semi-answered my question. I was looking actually on page 40 at the golden thread, and I was just intrigued to know where, once you get to the performance stage, where that feeds in to us in general, and how you analyse, the success and how that's taken forward, any lessons learned, that sort of thing. But I think you kind of answered that.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, just to say that these measures of success will feed into our overall performance reporting. So, and we'll go, I think our next item is the Q1 performance report. And what you'll notice about that is for our key performance indicators. Actually, what we want to do is to include some of these milestone performance indicators, and also the kind of target operating model performance indicators within that, so we have a much richer performance reporting in future quarters.
Thank you. Councillor Shearer. Heather?
Sorry about that, just sorting out the microphone. Yes, thank you. And thanks so much for the work that's gone into this. I think there's been, I hate using the phrase going on a journey, but I feel like I've been taken through a journey in understanding it, because I came to I'd never come across target operating models before in my business experience. It was a new concept. And so I think that the couple of things I just wanted to say really more than anything was that I've so far been very assured by the fact that it is a living document, and that you have reacted in the rooms I've been in. The team's reacted really well to the kind of feedback that's come back from people. And I hope that continues, because I think that's really important. I couldn't remember all the things that were mentioned to see whether this particular edition's got all of the changes that people had mentioned. But I feel kind of assured that you're going to do that. And I do appreciate the effort to get something that can hold us to account in terms of what good looks like. And I hope that once we've got that, this is something that we do all use to challenge each other, that we're all doing the right thing. Because I think and that we're getting to that right spot. So like I said, I've not seen this before, so I've got nothing to compare it with. So I guess the only question I have, and I'm not one for making any amendments, I have to say, to recommendations here, but I guess what we have to implicitly say that the recommendation is that we agree it, but subject to that idea that this is not the final fast, firm document. I just wanted that clarity that that's what the recommendations really are saying.
Thank you, Chair. It's an excellent question, and part of this process in terms of that, and it's a slightly trite phrase in terms of that living document, but the critical part is if we are seeing services develop a certain way that challenge the operating model, we need to ensure that they are setting that out as part of that development, but also then that then triggers the review or the development of the operating model as part of that. The delegation that's in place to myself in consultation with Councillor Buck Philip is there to simply make any of those minor tweaks or amendments to make sure that it is readable and can be published in that way. Any significant changes to either services or the operating model itself will clearly need to be brought back to this group for final approval.
Thank you. Not seeing any other lead members or associate lead members, so move to other members in the room. Anybody online? No, not seeing anybody else who wants to add anything else. So it remains for me to thank Rachel, Sarah and Alan and all the team that have been involved with the writing of this, to thank you so much for all the work that's gone into this. Particularly pleased to hear it's gone through scrutiny and it's had so much input from across the organisation. So our recommendations are to agree the target operating model for Somerset Council and to delegate authority to the Executive Director, Strategy, Workforce and Localities to make any future minor amendments or improvements to the target operating model in consultation with the lead member. So I see that proposer for that. Councillor Buck Philip, seconder Councillor Lyshon. Those in favour, please. Those against. Thank you so much, Rachel and all your team. Sorry, I turned my microphone on. That leads us on to item 7, the Q1 Corporate Performance Management Report, which is pages 47 to 74, and invite Councillor Lyshon to introduce.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd just like to say that this report is well placed in our agenda, as Councillor Wilkins has already established for us, immediately following the target operating model, which references performance data on page 38 of the pack, if you wanted to go back to that. So for our performance report, we are still working with interim measures, although they're now considered under each of the council's 4 priorities, which are very much welcome. And we also have a plus of effective, efficient and sustainable council, in addition to our 4 political priorities, as without that improvement and the underlying transformation of the council, none of our 4 priorities could be fully achieved. So this report has made the first step to aligning corporate performance indicators with council plan priorities. As I've said, there is considerable work still to be done, and in this financial year we will align performance reporting with budget monitoring and strategic risk monitoring through both the corporate and resources scrutiny meetings and through executive. So I would say that all members, all colleagues across the whole council are encouraged to bring forward areas of particular interest to them and their residents as we look to add and improve the performance indicators as we move through the year from our interim situation. And I would add something that I first added in opposition. I'd really like us to do some wild card performance indicators each quarter, because I know that this council will be recording performance indicators that nobody would even know are tasks that the council undertakes and responsibilities that we hold. So I really hope that each quarter we could have some wild cards just to give people an idea of the breadth and the depth of this council's work. So I'm not sure whether I'm handing over to Sarah Crackney or to Alan Jones, but whoever it is, it comes with my thanks. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Lyshon. Not much to add to that introduction, but yet one of the things I did want to add was that obviously as we move towards holding all of our information on Ideagen, our reporting system, which is going to include performance, risk, all our internal audit, that makes those identifying those wildcard indicators really easy. The other thing is we're able now to tag performance, and we'll be able to tag risk against our corporate priorities, which, as Councillor Lyshon says, is really connecting us towards understanding our progress towards delivering against our vision and priorities, which is a shift. So for this first quarter of our second year as Somerset Council, you will see in the appendix that it isn't in service by service, it is aligned to our corporate priorities. That's going to take, I think, a little bit of getting used to, and it is slightly more taxing in terms of getting the explanation and making sure that we're matching that against the indicators. So please bear with us as we develop this further, but we are very ambitious to improve our performance reporting and our risk reporting, and this is part of a step towards that. So you've got a summary table, paragraph 6, you've got the appendix, which goes into more detail, which colleagues around the room will be able to respond to. Thank you.
Okay, any comments or questions? Councillor Shearer, Heather.
I do love a performance monitoring paper. I like risk registers and I like performance. I'm getting a real reputation for liking this kind of stuff. I think I've said in other rooms, I do appreciate, I think it's really good that we're going to we're aligning these with our priorities. If that makes sense. Absolutely hear what you're saying, Sarah, about we have to get used to looking at these. I think there's something about the when I first looked at it, you kind of when you look at one of the statistics, you kind of want the narrative to be close to it, and at this point it's not quite there. So if you're dashing through a report, it feels a bit weird, but we can that can all be sorted out. I'd appreciate knowing more about the tolerances around when an outcome is regarded as red or amber or green, whether that's bang on or if there's a percentage either way, because as looking through them, some of them seem to be if you're 0.1 off, suddenly you're amber rather than green, and others you could be 5 or 6 points off, and so if whether that's done consistently, and I think I'm sure it is, but to make sure that it is, and that kind of if I didn't see it and it's there, forgive me, but I didn't see if that was in the document to say, and this is how we handle the actual appendix, this is how we handle tolerances. And I think as well, the example where we've got targets quite rightly, but some of the things in the target column are actually saying national averages. I'm thinking the one about CLA, the numbers of our children looked after, the target is actually the national average. No one's aiming for the national average. Luckily, we're below it, which is really good. But it's just to be clear, to help people understand what they are. So there's just some kind of comments about it. But I think anything else I was going to say on this one? No, I think that was really what my comments were, just to help you read the. And I'm sure the next time we see it, it will iterate better again. I think that the narrative bit is one of the complicated ones to help you understand it, because you want to understand the variances.
Just to come back on the, thank you, all really good points and things that I'm seeing myself as I kind of look through. Just to pick up on the tolerances bit, so some do have tolerances, some don't. Where there are tolerances, they are set by each individual service. It's something that we have been working through with individual services, but I think you're absolutely right to be able to describe exactly why those tolerances are set where they are, really important. In terms of those where it's a straight, yes, you're hitting it, no, you're not, I think we need to go through these in a bit more detail. Thank you.
That's Wakefield.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to comment on what is happening in a part of our adult social care team on page 60, where it talks about the total number of overdue Care Act assessments. It's quite easy to see there that as of January we had 901, but in June we had 525. I thought the committee might be interested to know, as of today we have 435. Of those, we have got staffing issues, which is one of the reasons it's slower than we'd like it. In South Somerset, it's 180 outstanding, but we've got quite a lot of newly qualified staff there, and it takes longer to do those Care Act assessments as the staff are being brought into working up to speed, and I think the first year they have to be overlooked anyway. Most of the other areas in the county, there's about 30 to 40 outstanding. Of the 435, about 3/4 are completely new to the council. The others are reassessments. So that figure is a figure for both reassessments and new ones. We are obviously concerned that people are running out of money, so we're getting more people coming and saying we have to look after them. But the main thing is that overdue Care Act assessment is being tackled effectively by our team, and I'm very proud of the work they're doing. And I don't want anybody to go away thinking that we're not making progress on this, because we definitely are. We will get it down to as few as possible, as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wakefield, for that reassurance on that one. And we do note the significant progress that has been made. Not seeing any other leader associate members, so go to Councillor Fothergill and then Councillor Woods.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. So I've taken Liz Lation's advice and read this very carefully, so I have a number of questions. I wonder whether it's best to go through all those questions together or to actually do them one at a time. I'm happy. I think it'd be better to go through them all and then, rather than just keep slots.
You said a number. Could you give us an indication of the number? Is it greater or less?
There's about 6 or 7.
If it's less than 10, I think we'll just move on. Yeah,
so we just go through them all.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. The first thing is I note the change to include them into themes. However, on page 63, I think it's quite disappointing to see that the percentage of Somerset schools rated inadequate is almost hidden away amongst highways, transport planning, library services and licensing. It seems very odd that such an important thing rated inadequate is just hidden away, and I would just ask us to review that for transparency. On page 66, if I may, the overall school attendance figure is now at 91.9%, which is below the target of 92.5, but it's showing green. I just wonder why it's not showing red, but it's below the target. On the secondary attendance, the figure is now 89.8 against a target of 90.7. When it was at 90, it was red. Now it's below 90, it's gone back to amber. I'd like to understand the logic of that. The children with SEND has got a target of 86.7. When it was 86.6, it was red. Now it's 86.6, it's amber. I'd just like to understand the logic of that as well. On page 67, I've got no questions. Page 68, no questions. Page 71, I'd like to understand why the first 6 areas are still waiting for targets and tolerances. We must have been waiting quite a long time for that. I don't check back, but I would have thought that we'd got targets for all of those areas and tolerances for all of those areas. The second from bottom, percentage of tenants are overall satisfied with the housing services provided by Somerset Council. 77% is shown at 73% for this quarter, and yet it's amber. Why isn't it red? It actually says that the tolerances will be confirmed. Well, if we haven't got tolerances, how do we know that it's amber and not red? So there's a big question mark there about how that's been determined. On page 72, the percentage of house dwellings without a valid electrical safety certificate should be 100%, as it would be if we were private landlords, and being closed down if we didn't have them. It's only 96%. I just wonder if somebody can explain to me why 4% or 400 houses in our ownership don't have a valid electrical safety certificate. And then finally, you'll be pleased to hear on page 73, there is a item on workforce apprentices to be confirmed tolerances and targets, but this is a falling figure. I just wonder why that's not in red, because that's a falling figure and unacceptable when we come to employing apprentices. Number of questions there. I think there's confusion over how the tolerances are being applied, how the targets are being interpreted, and the use of the RAG rate, and I'd like it reviewed.
Thank you for those questions. Sarah, do you want to give an overall view, and if necessary, we'll pass on to service areas to respond?
Yeah, thank you for those. I think in terms of, obviously we'll need to look at each of those in turn to understand how they've come out. I wonder whether the move across to the system means that something's something's happened in that space. But if we can take away those, have a look at them and then respond, it'd be really helpful.
Can I just be helpful and say I'm happy to take that as a written response to those points if it's easier for this meeting. I don't particularly need you to go through those.
Thank you, David. I just wondering if any of the service areas wanted to comment at this stage, or we're just going to leave it for the written response.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that the tolerances are not right. We need to look at that in terms of the, particularly the education ones and the children's ones are quite strange. They need to be corrected. I understand that the school gradings, inadequate gradings one is in a section under flourishing and resilient Somerset because there was a decision to try and group key performance indicators under theme rather than by individual directorate. But I can see that does look a bit strange in relation to the other school ones being in a different place. So we'll definitely review all of those and look at them again. Thank you for the question.
Okay, can we pick up the electrical certificate ones, please, and the other housing ones?
Yeah, thank you. So in regards to the EICR, so it's the 5-year fixed electrical inspection testing. So there is a target of 100%. You'll see our progress against and towards that target is improving. We did refer to the housing regulator on the basis that we were failing to meet compliance. That's something we've inherited from the previous Somerset West and Taunton side of the landlord function. It's to do with the upgrades required. Some of those are required by the network operator. So EICRs conduct everything into supply into the property. So there is an outstanding action. We are dealing with it. We have an action plan to deal with it. Progress is improving. We've self-referred, but we're not there yet.
I wonder if that action plan could be shared, please, if that does exist. Thank you.
By all means.
Okay, thank you for your questions, David. And Rosemary Woods online.
Thank you for that, Chair. I'm afraid this is a very detailed report, which I haven't gone into, but I want to throw in, as Councillor Lation pointed out, whether there is any wild cards. Now, my wild card is something that makes me very wild, is the lack of consistency about the county and the way they look after the coasts and our harbours. It's something you don't seem to want to discuss in depth at all. Am I wrong in that? When I ring up the officer or when I get in touch with the officer, I'm told, oh, well, it'll happen eventually, I think is the attitude. There's a lot of problems on our coast and in our harbours that we need to deal with. When will you deal with those? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Councillor Federica Smith-Roberts to respond.
I think that's a very broad question there, Chair. I think it's one if Councillor Woods wants to email me directly offline. In relation to our harbours, obviously we've got our harbour boards and our management committees. We've got our statutory authority, or we are the statutory authority for harbours. So I think there's a difference between what we have to do and then also in relation to coastal erosion, which I think is what Rosemary's referring to. But if she emails me, we can pick it up. But we do have lots of different ways that you can interact with us and being the lead authority on different matters.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I've got a question from Francis Nicholson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, I see the exclusions data there. Thank you. And bearing in mind everything that David has already said, but I wonder if it would also be possible in future to see the suspensions data and performance. It would feel important in that the one leads to the other.
Okay, so sorry, I'm not quite sure what you're asking for. So suspensions data and performance.
So, well, then suspensions, we have the exclusions data. We do not have the suspensions data. What used to be called fixed term exclusions, they're now separate.
Yeah, we can certainly add that in.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That's not a problem. I think we do have to be quite careful that we don't broaden the amount of reporting too much, because we used to have a very broad report, particularly for education, which we tried to cut down, but I do recognise that suspensions and exclusions are different sides of the same coin, so I'm happy to look at that again.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that assurance. Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Chair.
I believe there was a comment in the chat that your microphone wasn't working during that question. I'll summarise. It was asking if the council could be fined for non-compliance with the electrical certificates and the consistency with the private sector. You're still not working, Mark. Should we get you an answer?
As a private sector landlord, if I don't conform to the gas safety regulations and the electrical safety regulations, which we have to do either 5-yearly or annually, I will get fined by this council. So with the greatest respect to what the officer said about we've got 400 properties and we're getting, my argument is who's fining you then?
So the council doesn't have the ability to take legal action against itself, so we have referred to the housing regulator. We've done a self-referral to acknowledge that we are failing in that area. We've submitted an action plan to the regulator with regular updates. So they are satisfied with our progress. They are not satisfied that we are failing, but we cannot fine ourselves in this instance. Ultimately, the council can make a decision to take action against a private sector landlord, yes.
For you, I find that quite remarkable.
There are many such mysteries and in this world. I do appreciate the inconsistency, but that is a national inconsistency. But we need to. The important thing is that we address that shortfall, which is what we're doing as quickly as we can. Councillor Fothergill, sorry, can I just check, Councillor Wood, you're on your camera is on. Are you expecting to come back in?
No, I'm sorry, I didn't realise it was on.
No, your looming presence in the room was marginally distracting. Councillor Fothergill, then.
Thank you for allowing me to come back. I just want to emphasise that the reason for asking the question is not about certificates. That will be sorted out during the process of the law. The reason for asking the question for me is we've got people living in properties who deserve to be the protection of those certificates, and at the moment they haven't, and that's my concern. It's like my questions about vulnerable children living in substandard housing. We need to protect the people that live in them, and that's the reason for the question.
Yeah, and that's the assurance I think we were trying to give in the answer. I appreciate the inconsistency that Councillor Healy has pointed out. Councillor Lysham.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Fothergill. David, I agree with you about percentage of Somerset schools rated inadequate. I think that fits much better in Fairer, more ambitious. And I just wanted to say I was really glad to hear something on the radio this morning about losing the one-word judgments through Ofsted on schools. So actually how that will be reported now will hopefully change, but we'll definitely pay attention to that and where it sits in corporate performance reporting. Thank you.
Thank you. You do not want to get me started on Ofsted inspections, folks. Councillor Sarah Wakefield.
I just wanted to just unpick a little bit more what Chris Hall had said about those inspections. My understanding is they are annual inspections. They're not annual inspections. 5-yearly. Okay, so it's there could be something that's 4.5 years old that hasn't been or whatever. So that over 5 years old that hasn't been expected. It's just that I know these are. I mean, I know it's great. I know that private landlords have to do them, but these are, you know, really special checks. People don't do them in their own homes. I don't do them in my house. I don't think anybody. These are what for houses that are let, obviously, and it should up to be a certain standard. I just wanted to know what the time length was, and are we what sort of electrical appliances we were talking about, really.
So the checks happen for fixed installations, so they're not appliances, they are the fixed installation within the property, the sockets, the fuse boards, all of the wiring infrastructure. So they happen on a 5-yearly basis, and what we're reporting here is that they are failing at the point of test. They're not out of test, they are failing at the point of test, and some of that requires infrastructure upgrades with the network provider, so that we can then upgrade the board to a suitable and compliant board. So some of the delays are elsewhere, but they are our responsibility. When you rent a property, you must undertake this inspection on a 5-yearly basis.
So what you're really saying is there are some properties that we shouldn't be letting.
We are allowed to let them, and we have self-referred to the regulator.
Mr. Sharkey.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I think we're all making the same point here. The reason we undertake these inspections is to make sure the properties are safe for people. So we would not willingly or knowingly let a property that wasn't safe. So we undertake the inspection. Some of the properties will fail the inspection. That is the point of the inspection. So that means we need to do some work to fix that. As Mr. Hall's saying, some of that work is not within our gift. It's other parties have got to do that, particularly about the actual supply to the property. If we ever undertook an inspection and we deemed the property was unsafe for occupation, of course, we would move people somewhere safe, or we do emergency work to fix it if that was possible. So by reporting this, what we're saying very clearly is this shows that we actually are inspecting. The stat that I always look for is how many properties haven't been looked at in that 5-year period, because that is where you've got a risk of something being a problem. And last time I looked at that stat, we're pretty much up there now. We've always got a few hard to access properties. Some of these properties may well also be vacant now, so there might not be people living in them as well. So the action plan will happily share. The point I just want to pick up from Councillor Healy's comment, that is the way that works. You know, the council makes sure that private landlords keep tenants safe. The council keeps its tenants safe. We can't regulate ourselves, so we report ourselves to the regulator, which we did, I think, the week before vesting day, when we looked at this performance, and I actually signed off on reporting ourselves to the regulator to say this wasn't good enough. It is up to the regulator then to come and find us if they choose to, in exactly the same way the council would work with a landlord and say, well, what are you doing about this to get it fixed? That's what the regulator effectively done with us. And just while I've got the floor, Leader, if I can, I'm interested in the notification about single word judgments on school stay. I'm just also going to wait and see what they do about council judgments, because that wasn't mentioned at all. So I'm hoping that council workers' mental health is prioritised as much as education officials and social care and lots of other things we do.
Okay, not seeing any other comments or questions on the performance report. So we have recommendations that the executive is asked to review the performance information provided within Appendix A, and in particular the narrative relating to performance this quarter. Can I see a proposer, please? Councillor Lysholm, seconded by Councillor Shearer. Those in favour, please, and those against. That's clearly carried. And thank you so much for all the work that goes into producing this report. And we move on to item 8, which is the 24-25 General Fund Capital Budget Monitoring Report. Outturn, and I'd call on Councillor Liz Lysholm to introduce the item.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the first of 4 finance reports today. So apologies to those who've been reading them, because it does feel confusing at times, and one reads sometimes the same point across different reports and then gets totally confused between the years. So we're on capital first, we're on the outturn, so last year first, then we'll move on to this year. So the capital programme of last year, 23-24, was the combination of the 5 councils' programmes, and that included some underspends that came forward from 22-23. I hope I never have to work on such a situation again of trying to understand the capital programmes of 5 separate councils, working with 5 separate teams of officers and trying to kind of triangulate, or whatever the word is, across those councils. But but many of those officers are not with us now, but retrospectively, I do thank them for their tolerance and their patience as I try to understand what the capital programme for the first year of Somerset Council would look like. So this particular paper was not presented at Corporate and Resources Scrutiny last week because they had a particularly long agenda, and instead they concentrated on the Q1 reports for both capital and revenue. So on page 76, we see details of slippage in Towndale and levelling up programmes, where of course the funding will also carry forward into the current year, and then a smaller amount to the end of March 26, when those levelling up and Towndale programmes finish. And as this council is obviously not able to absorb any overspends on projects, either when those projects are run by other organisations or by this council, it's not surprising that it has taken so long for projects to be de-scoped amongst rising prices and have therefore slipped. There's something in here that I think Councillor Redmond particularly will be of interest, that we need PIDs on page 79. I think that's either programme or project initiation. But that again, as always, thank you. We need those acronyms spelt out. Page 81 refers to further review. So that is still challenging work for us, but we are working now with one team. And on page 87, I'd like to draw colleagues' attention to the remarkable list of achievements in schools for Somerset, both maintained and academy schools, both new schools and maintenance on schools and improvement. It's a remarkable list. It runs across previous years, so previous administration, 23-24 and into the current year. And I believe that that is worthy of much greater notice across the county. So I will be handing over to Nicola Hicks, our service director, rather than to Maria as our new section 151 officer. I thank Nicola very much for her work with her team on putting these papers together all at the same time. I'm really sorry that you and I have had them all in one meeting, but I am very glad that we are making progress now. Thank you, Nicola.
Thank you, Councillor Lation. Good morning, members. Not a significant amount to add to this paper, actually, probably just to draw your attention to section 28 on page 81 of the report that does actually show of that we did spend of the 117 million, actually only 24 of that was borrowing. So actually a great deal of spend in relation to money that we'd received from other parties. I think just to reiterate what Councillor Lation said, there is a significant amount of work to do with the finance team and budget holders across the authority to get the profiling of our capital programme correct. I think there's been some nervousness about doing that in terms of will money be taken away from people if we do the reprofiling, and also nervousness around if we've received external grant, if the conditions with that grant, if we haven't been met. But that's all about working with central government to say if we need to reprofile. But we're doing a significant amount of work, which is proving quite challenging because, as Councillor Lation said, we have lost a significant amount of legacy knowledge just in the finance team and outside of that finance team. So we're trying to pick up that work now with new finance people, new budget holders. But we will continue to do that to get more accurate profiling, as you'll see the effect that actually not having an accurate profiled spend in the capital programme has on our revenue budget in terms of forecast borrowing. And it's about how our mine and Maria's individual finance teams work together to get that profiling accurate and to improve our budget monitoring in that area. But nothing further to add, really, and just happy to take any questions.
Okay, Councillor Wilkins first.
Thank you. It's a very good report. I'm just interested in how the new government is how you're dealing with the new government with the capital programs. You said, you know, we have to. How can I put it? Are you finding any difficulty in certain certain areas, or is it quite smooth all the way through?
So I'll have a go at that one first. So I'd say, in terms of if we need to contact them to reprofile any of our regeneration scheme spend or spend that they're giving us, that hasn't been too bad, I would say, in terms of the officers still remain in place in order to have those conversations and get that done. We are seeing some slight delays with anything new that was coming in. I know we're still waiting on some confirmation of documents in relation to gravity, and that is being chased at the moment in terms of whether we can get that moving, because we do seem to have stalled in some of those areas. So I think anything that was potentially in flight and underway isn't too bad, but anything new is proving a little challenging.
Okay, so nothing from lead members or associate lead members. So if we go to other members in the room, Mandy Chilcott. Good morning, Mandy.
Good morning, Chair, and thank you for the report. My major concern with it, which is probably ongoing really, is the figures are so far adrift. You know, it's a massive amount. So you've got a spend of 117 million against a budget of 314. So that says two things to me. Firstly, that we have not delivered on the projects we were hoping to deliver on. And that there have been delays for the people of Somerset. And secondly, there is a cost of borrowing, as you've already mentioned, which means that money could have been spent on other projects in the county, and we know how tight our budgets are. We'll talk in a minute about Q1, but it doesn't showing me any real signs of improvement, and that's my concern. This has been an ongoing issue for the council. We just have not got on top of this budgeting. And my questions are, one, with the change of government, is any of it likely to be clawed back? We know there's in their words, a financial black hole. So is there any risk of that at all? And secondly, in the coming year, if we see major variances, will again some of that budget be pulled back, because we've got lots of other uses for it in the council?
Maria Christophe, Interim Chief Finance Officer in Section 151. I think the capital programme budgets, it's really important to remember that we're supposed to be looking at them over a larger period of time. They're not really annual budgets. The profiling across a larger period of time is really important for us to get right. Now, bringing the capital programme together. However, the ambition of the people delivering the capital programme sometimes gets ahead of itself, and the profiling can be front loaded. So we will be reviewing that across the board. I would say to you, the benefit to the revenue budget of not actually spending borrowing has obviously come through in the revenue budget outturn. So it is an important thing for us as a council where we were at outturn. Also, there were projects that would have been de-scoping and changing throughout this period of time. So there is a different way of thinking around capital in terms of the longevity of a capital programme and its delivery milestones in terms of project delivery milestones being matched with the financial budgets. And we will be looking at that in the new financial year. In terms of the any risk to government clawback, I haven't heard anything. So I wouldn't be suspecting that anything will be changing in terms of the amounts of money that we've received in terms of government grants and other monies, as no change has been announced.
Thank you. I fully understand the multi-year projects. My question, I suppose, to you is 151 is, are you happy with £196 million variance on this year's budget? And whilst you say it's an advantage to the revenue day-to-day spend, it's not an advantage in that if at the beginning of the year you are putting more money aside for that project than is needed, that money could have been used really well elsewhere. Thank you.
Can I just come in first to say, where there are government grants and those government grants are confirmed, we're hearing that we're not over concerned about whether those grants will continue to be offered, and where the spend slips, the grant also moves to the following year. That's what I'm seeing in the town deal. So forgive me for being a bit parochial, but I am heavily involved in the Glastonbury town deal. And there was a turning point in the last financial year where we'd had to de-scope and again de-scope a project that was a sports and leisure hub, which actually belongs to this council and is leased to Fusion Lifestyle. So this is Tor Leisure in Glastonbury. We de-scoped again. We went out to the market, and suddenly, at a point in the last financial year, we had 5 really good tenders back in. And for me, that was a turning point, because we had been really concerned as to whether we would be able to do that project within the fixed amount of money through the town investment plan and the town deal. And then suddenly the market appeared to settle in construction, and we had 5 tenders, 5 quotes from companies, all in the West Country, with 3 of the 5 being in Somerset. And I felt, oh, good, we might actually start to make some progress. But that progress will have a tail, and it will take us time to get on top of it. But where there is borrowing for projects, the borrowing for a capital project is not. I take your point that you could see that as money that would be available for services, but if the 151 officer has predicted borrowing for projects, working with the team, that's not money that they would just then say, oh, well, we'll put that somewhere else instead. My understanding is that it is all really carefully budgeted, and that it sits in a particular place. I know if Ros Wyke were here today, if she were still the lead member for economic development, and soon I've no doubt that Mike Rigby will be all over it, they will be seeing the same thing in levelling up and in projects. And there are some levelling up, particularly the cultural levelling up in the former Mendip area, the east of Somerset, where we don't yet have confirmation from government. But that is not yet in the capital programme because it's not confirmed yet. So I think the way capital budgeting is done is confusing for people who've worked in business and other sectors. I think it's only when you've worked in the public sector that it kind of makes sense, that separation. And I'm absolutely certain that with Maria as our 151 officer now, that we will see some change and we will see some improvements in the way we put our reports together and the way we report to this council and to the public.
I'd add that the last financial year was extremely challenging on various different fronts. So inflation, interest rates as well. And it would have been appropriate to approach each capital programme and project individually at those points in time. We would have seen construction inflation going through the roof and all sorts of different aspects of costs. So managing those costs within those financial envelopes are the key items that I'm looking for. The capital budget being set in February at Budget Council sets the direction of travel. And as we progress through this financial year, we'll be reevaluating and preparing for the February budget setting in terms of capital that bring together all of those various threads that you've mentioned in terms of revenue cost of borrowing, the impact on the revenue budget and affordability of the capital programme.
Okay, thank you. I think that's everything we've got. Oh, sorry, Councillor Osborne, too.
Thank you. Morning, Chairman. It's just a quick query on page 86, Appendix A, Table 1, Adults and Health, Children's Services Overview. I note that for children, for adults, that the total amount of slippage is going to be 3.2 million out of about 8 million spend in round numbers. You've also commented or highlighted that the adults residential programme is yet to be finalised, which is why there's been some budget slippage into future years. When do you anticipate that the budget for the adults residential programme will actually be formalised? Because there's a concern that when things start to slip into future years, that money can be taken away if you don't secure it. And how much of that is actually government contribution?
I'm looking at people extending answers across the table.
You can do
I think it's Mel that's going to respond.
So we are looking at this moment in time, what do we need and what don't we need? The challenge we've had is that some of our, it says it's for residential, let's take it, it's our learning disability that we are looking at. And we have quite a few people at the moment that are prepared to do the bills without us putting any funding into them, dependent on whether we are giving land, etc., etc. So we're in the process of looking at that, particularly when it comes to some of our decants, etc., of some of our older properties for learning disability. So some of the ones that we gave over to Discovery, and some of that's been worked on. So it'll probably take us during this year to come up with exactly what we do want, and we'll be working with that during the year.
Thank you, Mel. And when do you anticipate bringing a report on that back to either adult and health scrutiny or executive?
Later in the year. Let me say winter, because the winter can be any time, but let me say later in the year.
Okay, that's fine, Mel. I'm sure we'll look forward to seeing that at scrutiny.
Thank you. And not seeing anything online. So we have recommendations that we note the capital outturn position for 23-24 of 117.8 million and approve the slippage of 196.89 million from 23-24 into 24-25 and beyond while we review the capital programme. Approves the removal of the underspend and approves the changes to the capital programme approvals as detailed in section 26 of this report. Proposed Councillor Lyshon, seconded Councillor Shearer. Those in favour, please. Those against, recommendation is clearly carried. Which brings us on to item 9, which is the 24-25 General Fund Capital Budget Monitoring Report for Quarter 1, and invite Liz Lyshon to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. And actually, quite a lot of what I was going to say in this introduction we have already covered in the previous paper, so I'll say less, except that one of the things that we really need to be sure that the council can cope with is having the required resources to complete the programme for this year. I take on board all the comments about slippage. And also we have to bear in mind that with the new government, we need to have some capacity within the council to develop early stages of future programmes and projects in order to take advantage of future funding, although clearly at this stage with the new government and their back to school today, so there is an awful lot ahead. There's a budget ahead. We don't know, but we need to be prepared in advance. I do want to just apologise to colleagues that on page 112 we've got the text on the Firepool programme missing, and unfortunately Glastonbury Town Deal text is repeated. That's not my fault. I don't think that I am so obsessed with Glastonbury that is all I think about. That is a genuine error, and in the minutes we will ensure that the correct text goes into the minutes. And we have of course talked already about reprofiling of a capital programme, its impact on treasury management with regard to borrowing, and also of course minimum revenue provision. And in the recommendations, we have revisions to the programme that in point 25 that are listed with their funding sources. So these are, of course, all extremely welcome. So again, I'll hand over to Nicola Hicks, please.
Thank you, Councillor Lation. So just picking on table 1 on page 102, I purposely in this table changed the second from last column instead of saying slippage to say reprofiling. And that's because we are doing have started a significant amount of work with budget holders to reprofile the spend of projects. I share members' concern that actually at quarter 1 we're still seeing a spend of 12 million against a revised forecast of 195. I would expect with the work that we're doing to see that forecast reduced, not only in terms of reprofiling of the programme, we are going to have to look as an authority about what we are going to be able to deliver and put before members any recommendations in terms of removing anything from the capital programme, much as we did last year when we set the budget for that. I think just if we just move down through the report, I think what I'd just like to highlight is the additions to the capital programme, which is as we saw in the prior report. So they're on point 25 on page 106. So there's some additions, and that largely is grant funding additions there, because you wouldn't see any additions to the programme in terms of any borrowing unless that was a separate report or a budget setting. So that's just there. I'm trying to get the reports much more detailed in terms of the information provided. Unfortunately, we didn't get there with Q1 report as I'd like. We will for Q2. It's the last time members will see the Appendix B in the format that it's in. Appendix B is, I've seen a draft of it already where it details the scheme and the funding per scheme over the life of the project, not just, and so that I think will be a welcome addition to members. You can actually see the external funding and borrowing attributable to each project. Apologies, we just didn't get there for Q1 because it's the first year of closing the new finance system for capital, and that's proving quite challenging. So the team just didn't get that, but I think it will be a welcomed addition for Q2 report coming forward. But happy to take any questions. Oh, just picking up, could I just pick up scrutiny? So this report did go through scrutiny. They were interested in the slippage incurred in relation to road structures and highways. I think there was some concern for members around actually publicly, what does that look like if we're not spending in those areas, and actually is that then having a detrimental effect on our revenue budget in terms of the repairs and maintenance that may be needed where actually a larger capital scheme is needed. So I think there's just something there that I'll take back and discuss with the relevant service, but that was what I picked up from scrutiny.
Okay, any comments from lead members or associate lead members? Not seeing anything, so I'll go to Mandy.
Thank you. I think echoes of the previous paper with this one. So I thank you for looking at an improved report, and I think where the fundings form is really important, as in whether that burden of the interest falls on our revenue or outside of it. But really huge concerns. The actual spend at Q1, you know, is only a really tiny fraction of what's expected to be within the project. So I think there's going to be needs to be a really strong look at capacity, at deliverability. And if we look at highways in particular, most of this year's highways project will be programmed in already. Things don't happen immediately. There's normally a year's programme at least ahead. So there should be an idea of cost of that, and there should be some accuracy attached to that. And I am just still not seeing it. I welcome that there's going to be conversations, but I am concerned at the level of reprofiling, because our capacity, etc., unless something major changes, is going to be less next year than it is this year. So I think there has to be a realism as to what our staff can achieve and what they are able to deliver. And I'm probably not seeing that at the moment reflected in the report before us. Thank you.
I just want to make the point that when we were putting the 5 capital programmes together and looking at 21-22 and then 22-23, I'm seeing them being delivered now. And I think one of the things that people have found really difficult with levelling up and town deal projects is just the length of time it takes before the spades go in the ground and then the benefits are seen. Another thing that I'm sure we will talk about in future, and today's not the time to start the conversation, but is about something that I've seen working in the public sector, which is about the capitalisation of the resources while you're working on the project. So the resources that are specific to that project and the capitalisation of them. And I think there is a huge amount of work that we will be doing under Maria's guidance and with Nicola and all of the service teams where we're working on the capital programme and capital budget.
Right, not seeing any other members indicating. So we have got recommendations to note the contents of the report and appendices. Approve the slippage of 73.963 million from the 24-25 into 25-26 and beyond, whilst a further review of the capital programme takes place, and approves 11.4 million of changes to the capital programme approvals as detailed in section 25 of this report. We approve the environment of 0.528 million to the capital programme as detailed in section 26 of the report. Can I see the proposer, please? Councillor Lishon, seconded Councillor Wakefield. Those in favour, please. Those against. Okay, and we move on to the Housing Revenue Account Revenue and Capital Budget Monitoring Report for 24-25. And like Federica Smith-Roberts to introduce, please.
Thank you, Bill. So presenting Q1's monitoring report today on the HRA, and just as a reminder to everyone, which I know you're probably bored of me saying, the HRA is there to look after our social housing, and that's made up of two different models, one through the in-house service, which was previously the west of Somerset, and that of the north, which is run by the Almo Homes in Sedgemoor, but ran under one joint HRA plan that we put through last year. It's not council taxpayers' money, just as a reminder, it is tenants' money, and it is there to look after the housing that we provide for them, and they obviously pay through their rent. This monitoring report, as you'll see, is showing a significant variance or overspend in relation to the revenue of just over £2 million, and that's made up of for a variety of different reasons. I particularly draw your attention to 1.4 of the covering report that demonstrates that we're seeing a lot of repairs and maintenance. We're very much a demand-led service in housing, so we've got an overspend predicted for this year of just over £1.4 million, and then where we get handed back properties, it is currently taking us longer, so what we class as voids, to then re-let them, just because of the manner in which that they're handed back in. And some of them will need minor repairs, but some of them will need major work, such as kitchens, bathrooms, and in particular that does depend whether we've been granted access to do our capital work leading up to that point, and we may need to holistically look at the whole building and see what needs to take place there. We have seen an underspend in relation to supervision and management on staffing. I sometimes see that not as a good thing personally, because you can see actually probably if we had the staff, and we know that we've faced a recruitment challenge, not just within the housing team, but within the council in general. And you've seen that through the monitoring report, the number of vacancies, that actually that underspend works financially for us. But actually, if we had the staff in place to do the management, we would then look to perhaps be able to keep further on top of the repairs and the maintenance. We have then also got the insurance premiums of 312, giving an overspend. In relation to voids, we have got the teams from across the two models coming up with a plan to look to tackle those so that we can minimise that overspend where possible throughout this year. That will be a multi-faceted approach as to how we look to do that. That will be about recruitment and the structure and the capacity of the teams, looking at how we do the process in relation to voids. We're looking at the procurement of a contractor so that we can look to speed up that void work. We want to do some work on capitalisation where we probably haven't done that in the past, and make sure that we are capitalising any costs. And also work with both the homelessness team, because we do a lot of work around temporary accommodation, but also the extra care team where we've got voids, to make sure that we're maximising those voids as much as possible and putting people in houses, because we know that there is a demand for housing, and we know that we need to move these voids so that we have less. But open to any questions.
Okay, anything from lead members or associate lead members? Councillor Lishon.
Thank you. Thank you, Fed. On page 138.8.3, there's the difference in the government allowing full expenditure of right to buy receipts until 2025. Are we going to be able to make good use of that change for a very limited period of time?
I've got Kerry on the call, so I'm sure she'll give a more detailed answer. But my view politically is that we will do all that we can to make use of those. We have still got a significant build programme, in my view, coming forward, both within Homes in Sedgemoor and the developments that they're doing, but we've got the North Taunton Woolaway project as an example. But we do reprogramme our actual business case every year. But I'll bring in Kerry in case I've done something a bit different than her view.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. So just to reiterate, yes, the Right to Buy scheme has given us the ability to maximise that subsidy to 100% for this financial year and next financial year. So what we'll now have to do is review our capital programme and our current capital financing requirements and projections and just reassess how that looks. So we would look to maximise that opportunity as much as possible. So it would reduce our borrowing requirement in the next 2 financial years, which is obviously advantageous with interest rates at the moment. But we do need to then consider what the impact is going forward into future financial years and what the government suggests would be the percentage thereafter. So it looks like it would be about 50% thereafter. So it is positive views, hopefully reduce our borrowing requirement in the next couple of years whilst we do that.
I don't want to mention the impact of a section 114 on this council, but I think we need to raise it again because of its any impact on HRA grants, which are referenced in this paper. And I think if we need any further encouragement that we must maintain our financial discipline so that we do not get back to talking about the possibility of a section 114, our ability to take government grants for more social housing is incredibly important to us. And I know that all my colleagues will join me in believing that this is another reason why we must maintain our financial discipline. Thank you. It's not a question.
No, it's, but I'm sure many of us are nodding in assent as well. Just looking around for further lead members or associates, the notes, I'll go to Mandy Chilcott. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So a couple of questions, really, just some clarification around voids, and they are longer than anticipated. Is that because we don't have enough staff to get in and do the works quickly? For example, is it because we are seeing delays, perhaps if there's a new kitchen that needs to go in? And secondly, I'm presuming there will be reviews of properties, so we should have a rough idea of what sort of condition our properties are in before people exit them. So that's my first question. The second one is, you know, we are delighted that the new homes in Minehead are now starting to be occupied very soon, which is fantastic. But there has, for all sorts of reasons, been a number of delays in that. And I think the project has been much longer than was anticipated. I'm just wondering how that was budgeted for, because that will be a number of new homes, which will be lots of income that we won't have had that we perhaps might have budgeted for. So can I just understand, has there or will there be an impact on those delays on the budget for the rest of the HRA? Thank you.
Chris, do you want to take that one?
Let me go with voids first. So what we are seeing is that generally we have tenants stay a long time in our properties. We have component life cycles for kitchens and bathrooms and major fixtures and fittings. And what we're seeing is that for some of our older tenants, they are very reluctant to have upgrades taken or undertaken during the normal life cycle process. So we'll go to them and say, you need a new bathroom, and they'll say, no, thank you. And we have no right of entry. So we are seeing for those longest length tenants, properties are coming back with a backlog of maintenance requirements. We're also seeing generally conditions are poorer, not just lengthy tenants, but conditions are poorer in the return of properties back to the council. We do have a shortage of trade staff, and we are trying to work that through with the support of an external contractor so that we can have enough staff at the point of time we need to turn those voids around. That I would like to make a point. During the scrutiny meeting, there was a bit of confusion that we tried to resolve, but there's some confusion in the meeting that this represented poor performance in voids, and it doesn't. We are just off top quartile performance in void turnaround nationally. What we're seeing as it is expensive, and that again is a national issue in terms of cost of staffing, cost of materials, time taken, driving up costs as well. So conditions are difficult. We're also seeing new tenants have a greater expectation on the properties they'll take. So we are seeing people turn properties down. It's easy to let the brand new shiny properties, but it is harder to let some of our older housing stock, and that's across both landlord models. So we're working with the marketplace to try and find a better solution. In terms of condition, again, we refer heavily on component life cycles. We do undertake surveys, and we are looking as part of an action plan to improve the voids. To how do we speed up the transition of a tenant giving us notice to us getting in and undertaking a survey? So we're likely to be seeking some additional surveying resource within the HRA that should self-fund within this programme to actually speed this up. So the quicker we can turn the void round, the less downtime there is, with the greater level of demand we're able to meet within the housing waiting list, and the more rent we can accrue as a result of it.
I was going to say, does Kerry want to answer about Seaward Way? Or... Okay.
Kerry, do you have anything else to do with
Yes, I can give you an answer on Seaward Way. So just to remind you that when we set the budget for dwelling rental income for a financial year, we take the current stock at a point in time. So bearing in mind, we set a budget in February, which then starts in the April. So we have to work back through and look at what stock we have, say, in around about August, September time. So we take the current stock, we look at right to buy sale predictions, take-ons as part of the social development schemes. Seaward Way, we've been one of them, as well as an average kind of void percentage. So if the take-on for Seaward Way is delayed, then yes, there will be a financial impact on the amount of income being received. It depends on how many units that is and what the expected income was anticipated to be. So if there's a week delay for, say, that's like a handful of units, that won't have a very material effect on the kind of financial projections at all.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any more questions or comments on this item. No. So we have recommendations to note the HRA's forecast financial performance and projected reserve position for 24-25 as at the 30th of June 24, including the key risks and future issues and opportunities detailed in the report, which will be closely monitored and updated throughout the year. And we note the forecast outturn position of the capital programme. Do I see a proposer for that? Councillor Smith-Roberts, and seconded by Councillor Shearer. And those in favour, please. And those against. That's clearly carried. And I have in my notes a comfort break at 11:50, which means that we are half an hour ahead of schedule. Are we happy to carry on till 11:50? We'll take a break at that time. Okay. Superb. So we've got item 11, which is the 23-24 General Fund Revenue Budget Monitoring Report. Councillor Lyshawn to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a slightly improved situation since July, when we had a forecast underspend of 1.6 million. Now 1.8 million, and that of course protects and actually slightly increases our general fund reserves, something that I said at I think it was at an audit, has actually made breathing slightly easier for a while this summer, but not for long. I also need to make the point for colleagues that table 2 on page 152, and which is repeated on page 216. At the bottom, some of the descriptors of income have been transposed. So we've got the correct amounts, we've got some of the descriptors on the wrong line. And when I hand over to Nicola, she will address that. We've checked it thoroughly. We're convinced and we're happy that the figures are correct, but that I don't know how, have got some descriptors transposed. So colleagues will recognise that there is a great deal in this paper to acknowledge and commend, not least the effect that the control boards have had over the previous financial year, and also that there are very significant figures from the Connecting Devon and Somerset Gain Share and from Treasury Management, which we've already covered, of course, in the capital papers. The work of the finance team is continuing at pace as the statement of accounts is prepared for the external auditors. Grant Thornton have themselves acknowledged the inevitable additional work in preparing a statement of accounts for a new unitary council, and they have also recognised that there is additional challenge presented by having a new finance system. I think on this paper, we should all be concerned about the dedicated schools grant deficit, which has increased through the additional expenditure on the high needs block, as in so many upper tier councils, and actually now exceeds the combined reserves of the maintained schools. So the statutory override is due to expire in March 2016, having been extended 2026. 2016 was a different time. It doesn't seem that long ago to me, but so March 2026. And then from that point, if that statutory override finishes, then that deficit needs to be recognised within our overall level of reserves. This must be one of the major challenges for the new government, I would suggest. So if I could hand over to Nicola and ask her, please, just to cover those figures on the table 2 as well.
Thank you, Councillor Lation. So yeah, the table on table 2, page 152, apologies that some of the headings have been transposed. So just at the bottom table, bottom element, after the total after contingencies, reserves is correct at 125.7, transfer to schools is correct there. The next one at 57.4 should actually be grants. We'd have a significant issue if we only had council tax of 54.7. The next one down, business, the 6.7, that should actually be flexible use of capital receipts. The 122.2 should actually be business rates. The collection fund surplus is the next one at 0.6, and then actual council tax requirement is the last one at 338.7. So apologies for that, and I will pick up with the team how that happened to ensure that it doesn't happen again. Apologies, that was a late addition. So just if we stay focused on that table, is the outturn position for each service within the directorates. It shows the movement in the last column from month 10. When we brought the provisional outturn report to you in July, I did actually make a promise that I would go through and say, why did we have a significant movement from month 10 to outturn for each of those elements? This can be seen on page 155. So it's not a table showing it, you know, the individual reason why, but it does under each of the services there. The last paragraph, last sentence of each paragraph just does say about why there was a movement from month 10 to month 12. So as part of the in-year monitoring for this year's budget, and also as part of the work we're going to be doing to set next year's budget, we're going to be looking closely into those more so the non-people based services, because we know those movements in the adults and children's was largely due to just the forecasting in numbers and the increase in numbers. But the other services, I think it's important that we look into why there were those significant underspends. Now, some of it will be largely where we did ask through the spend boards and through the financial emergency to ask services to put a stop on all non-essential spend. And we've had much more scrutiny over, do we actually need to spend that money now, or can we delay that? So part of our work that we will be doing is to assess each of those underspends to see whether they will be retained or whether it's one-off. Also, as we've got 1 year now of the new council, we'll have a better understanding of the costs going through each of those services against the budget set. And actually then is that the incorrect budget, i.e. did they have too much in a certain area, and therefore can we look at amending that? So I think that's just kind of some of the work that we're doing for 24-25. which you'll see in the next report and also for next year's budget. The other thing I just want to mention that Councillor Lation didn't mention was just in relation to one of the recommendations. You'll see there is an Appendix 12, which is to do with the flexible use of capital receipts and the fact that we are proposing to use some of that now for My Life, My Future, and that's just in there. But there's no other change to the actual strategy. It's just that element. Just wanted to make sure members were minded of that.
Hey, Councillor Wakefield.
Yeah, just to comment on page 155 where we talk about the adult services outturn. Really, those increases have been taken into account in our budget for this year. That was the whole point, that it happened during the previous year. We've now taken into account with as people will know, a much increased budget, but those things have landed and we had to deal with them. So I'm much happier about the budget that we've got this year, and that we hopefully will be able to stay within it. But I don't think that we could have predicted that sort of variance at the beginning of the year, which happened during the year. I think that's right, isn't it?
Thank you, Sarah. Mr. Sharkey.
Thank you, Leader. I just wanted to pick up on a point that both Councillor Lation and Mrs Hicks made, that this was hard work. It was a tough year. And I just think, collectively members, the whole council, through scrutiny, through executive, through all sorts of other areas, and all of the officer team really pulled together. We made some big changes in year. In some of these areas, we inherited budgets that were misset. We didn't have full information when we set off. We had some savings we couldn't quite deliver, but we delivered the majority of savings. It was a tough year. It was a tough year for everyone who was here. I think we all remember that. But I think we should just reflect on actually the amazing work that colleagues did do through the spend boards, through managing services, through service management teams, through maximising grants, maximising income, minimising expenditure. We made a big difference, and actually it's giving us a lot more stability in terms of what we can do. We are still in difficulty in that we are still spending more than we raised technically, but we've got a lot more things now in the action plan, which has just been mentioned, that we're working on, which will hopefully deal with that. Not least, Councillor Wakefield just mentioned the variance in adult social care budget. But when we look at current year, obviously there's some really hard work going on in adults to use the money that we added into the budget to actually better manage the market and really be able to use our purchasing power in the market. So the commissioners in adults doing a really good job at trying to manage the cost down further than we started with. So I think there's a huge amount we need to keep doing, but it is worthwhile just reflecting the amount that we did turn over. Had we delivered the overspend as forecast originally, we'd be in real financial difficulty now. And whilst it's been tough, whilst we've made decisions we didn't want to make, and we've had to do some things that I'm sure we'd all prefer not to do, we have actually come together really well as a council to deliver against the budget for last year. So I think we should be very pleased about what we achieved, though I'd much prefer we did it in a different way in future years rather than as the emergency. But it's been really good work, and I just think we should really give votes thanks to the officers particularly who've carried out a lot of that work to make sure we can see the report we've got today.
Thank you, Mr. Sharkey, and thoroughly echo those thoughts and sentiments around the hard work that has gone on to get us to this position. It doesn't take away from still being in that context of financial difficulty, like many other councils are in the country, and we look forward to the fixing the fixing of the broken model of local government finance, and in particular social care, which is the root cause of the position we found ourselves in. Okay, Federica.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to echo something that the Chief Executive has said, but also add to the fact that I think for me, from communities, and I know we saw it across all the different directorates, but in relation to the city, town and parish councils and the work that they did in coming together with us. So the work that we did in relation to CCTV is an example when we said that we couldn't do it, which was, a heart-wrenching decision to have to take, but actually then to see that the city, town and parishes have stepped up and value that service. And we've seen that across a lot of different services and how they want to work alongside us. And that has been because, I guess, of the hard work of officers here, alongside kind of that culture and what we want to do and work with them moving forward through the LCNs and bringing them together. But I think that relationship will continue to grow and build as we move forward.
Yeah, and again, echo those sentiments. The work of our friends and partners in many organisations, especially city, town and parish councils, has been absolutely exemplary in solving this problem, as here in Somerset, and has kept our hands firmly on the steering wheel. Move on to other members. Councillor Chilcott.
Thank you very much, Chair, and of course all the hard work for all those across Somerset, like you said, towns, parishes, everybody is really appreciated, but there are still, for me, concerns within this. Firstly, reserves were used to set this budget, and I think if you look at this outturn, in some ways that's sort of hidden there, not that anything is being hidden, but that needs to be remembered. When you look at the outturn, it looks really positive, but in setting this, reserves were used. So I think that needs to be remembered. And for our public, it might look as everything's really fantastic. There are still huge challenges here. Secondly, those real pressures seen in adults and children's, there are massive overspends there, which we can see. But thirdly, the sort of underspend, especially in that place budget, which is what most of our residents care most about. You know, is their place clean, tidy, highways, etc. So that's seen an underspend, which has sort of helped to balance the budget out. We had that one-off windfall figure as well. But the other thing for me that's really concerning is that a lot of those savings that were predicted have not been made. And I think the reason that is a concern is because we are going to be so dependent on making the savings this year and moving forward into future years. So for me, that is a concern on reading the budget. But pleased we have not come in hugely over budget. That would have put huge pressure on the reserves and probably put us in a fairly precarious situation. So pleased to see it's where it is, but I think it gives perhaps a false illusion that we're doing perhaps better than we are in terms of budget. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for those thoughts. I don't think anyone has used any language that would suggest it was fantastic at all. So you know, we do fully recognise that the council remains in difficulty financially, and you know, there is, for me, there is a transparency there that we have. It was clear that were going to use reserves to balance the budget. I don't think that has been hidden, and I think that's been absolutely transparent in all our comms and papers. We do further recognise the situation that we have in both adults and children's social care, which is affecting this council. It's affecting many other councils as well. We have reiterated throughout that there is a broken model that needs fixing, and we can do what we can locally to be able to keep to make it sustainable. But there needs to be a national solution for a national problem, and those dialogues with government will continue, even though the government has changed colour. Did you want to come back, Councillor?
Yeah, thank you. It was just to say I know all of that, but obviously it's not, if a member of the public is reading this paper, it's not evident that support has come from reserves to balance, and it might make the council look as if they've had a better year than they have. And just finally, that paper with the wrong figures on it, are you going to just publish an addendum with an updated one, because otherwise it doesn't stand correct for the public record? Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the point should be made that I don't think a member of the public would look at this without looking at the original budget. I think it's the two are inextricably linked, but also that the point is absolutely taken, and everybody's nodding away that the correct lines will be in the public version.
Thank you, Chair.
If I could just add, Chair, that I do welcome that Table 2 contains all the income, 400 million plus of income that comes into this council during one financial year. And we will always be looking to improve our papers, our reports. I'm absolutely sure of that. This has been a particular year. I've been reading what came out from one local press source this morning, and they pretty much some detail in there that I'm not sure that I wholly agree with, but the overall view is the reports look better, but nobody's out there celebrating, and that would be about right. But protecting our general fund reserves, I think one of my first lessons from the then 151 officer back in 2017, when it was Kevin Nacey, he said, local authorities are different than businesses. In businesses, your first signs of distress are where you can't pay your bills and you can't pay your wages. In local authorities, look at the reserve levels first, because whilst they don't have the same issues of cash flow as particularly small businesses, the reserves are the secret to the health of a local authority. So we're well aware of that. And I know that you will continue to hold us to account. Sure.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing anybody else, so we'll move on to the recommendations. That we note the underspend of £1.8 million from the 23-24 financial year, which has been added to the general fund balance, and we approve the draws and contributions to earmark reserves set out in Appendix 11. We approve to release £0.7 million of available earmark reserve funding to general fund balance, and agree to continue to receive monthly budget monitoring reports in 24-25, which set out the forecast outturn for the year, with details of any mitigations and actions being taken to address any variances. And to note that the collection fund outturn report is still being finalised, and any under or overspend will be funded from or contributed to the reserves. Any material change in the reserve position will be noted in a future report. And to approve the amendment to the flexible capital receipt strategy to include the adult social care transformation programme, My Life, My Future, which is in section 34, appendix 12. Can I see a proposer for that? Councillor Liz Lyshawn, seconded Councillor Wilkins. Those in favour, please. Those against, that's clearly carried. And if we can move on to the general fund revenue budget monitoring report for month 3, quarter 1, which is on pages 235 to 296 on your hymn sheets, and would like to introduce Councillor Liz Lyshawn.
Thank you, Chair, and I've got my eye on the time and the comfort break. This is a satisfying quarter 1 to some degree, but my colleagues obviously realise that the corporate contingency is not allocated, but is included in that figure. I particularly like in the summary point 2 the main variances. I'm finding this a very useful and for all members, I think, a really easy way to understand those main variances. I just want to make the point, though, that not every underspend in a project is good news. So, for instance, on page 251, the line under fostering and permanence, which is showing an underspend, that is not good news, both for the young people of Somerset and for this council, because we achieve much better outcomes for young people with fostering and permanence, and it costs a great deal more, of course, to go to external placement. So we need to bear in mind that not everything and underspends is good news. The good news is that I now understand what the Hurlstone Bothy is and the earmarked reserve. I do know where Hurlstone is, and if you haven't walked there between looking over, I think it's Bossington Beach, isn't it? It is well worth an outing. And actually, if you park in the car park in the orchard at the bottom, you can have a great picnic too. But it did confuse me slightly. I've already said that it's absolutely essential that we maintain our financial discipline, and there is no room for complacency. I do want to thank, as we look at this quarter 1, the leadership from our chief executive, from our previous 151, from Nicola, and from the whole finance team, where I believe that Jason Vaughan as 151 has left us now, but he has left us in a better position to build a viable and stable future for this council. So I'll hand again, if I may, Chair, to Nicola Hicks for any further detail on this paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lation. So as I go through the report, I've got a few more things to say on this one, but what I'm going to do is incorporate some of the feedback from scrutiny so that we can pick up some of those comments as we go through. So as Councillor Lation said, the point 2, which shows the main variance, I think that is a welcome addition to the report. If someone was to pick up one of our reports and at least only read the first page, they would see those main variances there. I'll discuss some of those as we go through the report. I think if we jump down to the table at the top of page 239, you'll see there again, it's our standard table. I will confirm that the bottom half of this table does have the correct headings against the correct figures, so that's a start. One thing that I would probably point out from this is that corporate contingency line towards the bottom of the table there. If we were to, as an authority, have to use that corporate contingency, which members will may remember from budget setting, was about the money there, should the pay award be different than what it was budgeted for, then we would have to use that. If we didn't have that in there as an underspend at this present time, we would actually be showing an overspend. So I think that's just something to note, and I'm going to work with Maria around how we present that in the reports. I think the other thing to note, and something that came out of scrutiny, is they kind of asked the question is, how would we defend in the public eye that last year we were in a financial emergency, then we had an underspend, and now this is looking like everything's fine now when we're out of that? It was a good question, a good challenge. Actually, what this report fails to do is pick out that bottom line of the table where it says the capitalisation direction there of 36.9, and what I think this report needs to do is reference that back to the budget setting and how actually we're only in this position because that capitalisation directive has been requested there. So I think that's just something an improvement to be made to the report in terms of our transparency and for members of the public's understanding. Just in terms of the, there's a difference in this report to the one that was published for scrutiny. So the scrutiny papers went, and I realised there was nothing in any of the Q1 report about the spend boards. So I asked for that to be put in as a late addition. So that went as an appendix to the scrutiny report, but actually made it into this report in time for publishing in terms of including that in the main body of the report. I think is really vital to remember those spend boards are still in place. They are still there across the authority. What we have done is amend it so that the control actually is not everything over £100. Now we've increased the limit to £500, and that's around seeing the increased compliance across all of the services, and also giving a little bit of empowerment back to services, given they felt a bit like power was taken away over decisions and the speed at which they could make it for such a low value. So I think that's been a welcomed addition. That said, we will be monitoring what happens in those differences in values between £100 and £500 to see whether actually we need to put it back in place if for any reason we feel it's necessary again. But I think if you flip down to the bottom of page 241, there's a really important table there that shows the retrospective orders and how that has significantly decreased. So you remember, we don't refuse to pay any invoice that comes into the council, but we do make it more difficult for those that aren't on our exemption list that don't have a purchase order in place. But we were seeing high volumes of invoices coming in where the retrospective order was then put on the system. That's had a real decrease now from 238 down to 45 at the minute. And I think that's a really good good improvement and shows that the culture of the organisation has changed. It's taken a little bit of time, but we've got there in the end. If we just go into the appendices, just Appendix 1 for adults on page, just getting there, 245. Shows the variances across the different elements. It shows there that there are some overspends in certain lines of that budget, but then overall it's coming in as a forecast underspend of 2.1, and as mentioned, that's because a significant amount of additional funding was put into that budget when we set it for the current year. Appendix 2 for children shows the forecast overspend in children's and families, with external placements forecast at 9.1 million which is shown in detail on page 253. There are some mitigations of underspends in other lines of the budget to help reduce this down, and also the use of the contingency held in that area to bring it down. But I'll let either Heather or Claire come in at the end if they want to add anything in terms of the additional work that's being done to help try and mitigate those overspends. There was a request from scrutiny just to include more graphical information in relation to children's and adults' appendices, just in terms of they welcome the graphics that are in there, but they would like to see comparisons to the prior year so they can look on glance about how it relates to the prior year. So I'll work with the team about whether we can do that. Appendix 4 on page 267, just in climate and play, shows the main overspend is in the waste area, and members will recall you've had a separate report for that in terms of the additional funding that was needed for that this year, which is creating an overspend in that area. But we'll look to what we can do for budget setting for the next year to address the pressure that's going to put onto the council for future years. The appendix also talks about fluctuations in income in that service area. Just wanted to update members that as part of our review of budget for next year and this year, we're looking at all of our income budgets in terms of, are they the right level of budget? Have we got the fees right? Are we ensuring that we've got cost recovery as we move through into reductions in some service levels as well in terms of our spend. So that's quite a big exercise, but we are starting to carry that out now. Appendix 9, page 285. I think this has been highlighted in terms of how fundamental it is to make the savings that were put forward for set this year's budget. If we don't achieve those, they will create an additional pressure on what's already an additional a high value of gap for next year's budget. I think the main one to say there at risk is the children and families, and Claire or Heather could go through any action they're taking to try and address some of that. Just to finish for me, Appendix 11 is a new appendix to the budget monitoring report, and this details the sundry debtors that the council had. I think it's a very honest reflection of where we've been on our journey since having the new finance system, and also the legacy debt that was inherited from the 5 councils and what we've done to address some of that. I wouldn't say we're there yet. We've got a little way to go in terms of how we address that debt. I've received quite a lot of feedback and challenge from scrutiny around how we address our low value debts, especially in terms of licensing and lifeline. Actually, is there a different way of doing it so that actually we don't get that sundry debtor there in the first place of how we collect income? And I think there was quite a bit of challenge in that area. So I think there's a little bit of work to do with the team there to have a look at how we address that, and also then about generally debt collection and the resources we've got in that area. But I think it's a welcome addition to the report, and I'll make sure that we include that going forward at every quarter. But happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Sarah Wakefield first.
Yeah, I just wanted to further comment that in adults, we haven't actually implemented the £500 threshold raised from £100. It's £300 we're doing at the moment, just to keep that pressure on and make sure that people are aware of what they're spending. I think we feel that's the right thing to do for the moment. I wanted to ask a question about the purchase order, which you talked about, and it is obviously having an effect. Is it something now that has been accepted across the board? Are we still having difficulties with suppliers? I know it is something we certainly did it where I was working in private practice, and it was imposed on us as well. But is it something that, are we going to get further improvements from that, or is it just something that's now accepted and it doesn't cause problems?
I would say that the acceptance of the need to do it across the organisation is a lot better. I think there's still some way to go in terms of we've still got quite a lot of things on our exemption list that I would like to have a further review of. Things like utilities, you'll never get purchase orders on, it just be far too complicated. But there's other areas that I'd like the team now to focus on, working with the individual service areas to try and implement that where we haven't got that. We are seeing a couple of issues still, and I know a member of scrutiny raised it with me in terms of non-payment, and I think this is probably in relation to where orders aren't going on the system. It's still sometimes getting the payment is not going out in an accurate, in a timely manner, because it goes around the houses for sign off, and then it has to be coded, it has to go out the door. So the way that to get paid the quickest from this authority is to ensure that you do have an order number. But I'm not getting the volume of complaints in from individuals as I was. I've more got complaints in relation to debt recovery now because of all of that being switched back on and the way that we're handling that as an authority, and some changes that might need to be made.
Okay, thank you. Heather?
Thank you very much, and thanks for all the help we get from our colleagues in finance. It's incredibly, ours is a very, all budgets are complicated. I think that ours is one of the most interesting and complicated budgets to be managing. In terms of spend boards, I've just been reliably told that we're still at £100. We're still doing that. We may be moving it around, but right now we're trying to be. I mean, it's not in competition with Mel, but we're just trying to. We're just trying to keep a lid on things, which is, and we've got kind of used to it. So we may be moving it up, but not at the moment. I think the biggest things in terms of mitigations, and I was very pleased to have the opportunity to speak at scrutiny, and very pleased for the kind of challenge and the support there. It was actually really, it's good to have that kind of debate going on. The mitigations for us are of course around our placement costs, the fact that our children looked after numbers have been increasing. So now it's starting to downturn. Thankfully, people still continue to age and fall off our books, but if they to me, yeah, you never miss what a friend gets, Mel. But it, so in that regard, we're trying to. I suppose what we're trying to get more than anything is better at our forecasting and modelling. We are a demand-led service, obviously, but we have to just be smarter at that. We're accepting of the help we get again from our colleagues in finance and some of our specialists around forecasting and modelling, because that's really important. We're also trying to unpick why. If we can know why the children looked after numbers are going up or have gone up as they have, we may not be able to do anything about it, but if we can comprehend it, that would be really good. If there's something that's predictable, it can be preventable. So that's important. So I think of course, we've suffered on the cost of placements. We have to try to keep our Homes and Horizons project working as well as it can, so we can get those savings and better outcomes. And that hasn't always been going the way we wanted it to. It's new. Otherwise, every council in the world will be doing it. So we're making this up as we go to a degree. We're learning the problems we fall over, but trying to keep tight on it. Trying also to keep tight on our expectations around our 16+ supported living contracts. That we are working with our colleagues in our colleagues in housing, because there are shared responsibilities, let's say, and that can be complex to navigate. But we're trying to get there, because we all know one of the biggest problems in the county and in the country is not enough housing, not enough options for people to go into, whether they need to draw on our services or not. And we're finding some of our young people are stuck where they are, and if we could just move them, that would be smashing. So there's a lot of mitigation. I think page 285 has got quite a lot of those mitigations in there in more detail. But that's pretty much what we're at. I mean, we have a transformation board. I'm as sceptical as everybody else about meetings. Unless outcomes come from them or improvements come from them, you can have all the meetings you like. But I've been really quite assured by the quality of the kind of questioning around our both the finance element of transformation and transformation board working. So we'll try and leap in as much as we can with that.
Maria, do you want?
Yeah, just to add, the forecast outcome position, as Nicola's already said, includes the release, while not services, the release into the numbers of the 6 million contingency. So without that, we'd be looking at a forecast overspend of £6 million. So it is incumbent on us to do everything that we can to pull that forecast overspends in services back as much as possible, so that we can preserve the reserves and the capitalisation directive to the minimum that we need to use in order to get to the outturn. Of course, the forecast outturn, the spend has not yet been incurred, so we have every opportunity to pull back the actions, take different actions, so that our predictions about what's going to happen in the remaining year don't land at this at most. We pull it back so we can see a more improved position. And I would add, in terms of the discipline around expenditure, the control boards are a welcome intervention in the organisation, but the PO is the first place for most expenditure. So if there are retrospective purchase orders being placed, it means that there has been expenditure that is being commissioned or incurred without that authorisation. So we want to see that come down to zero, because it means that the thought process around expenditure is happening at that point in time. The PO is being raised, and then the goods and services are being commissioned, and then the invoice will come in, and there'll be a three-way match, I would expect. So that's the discipline that we want to get into. So while the report is an improved position, I would look for further improvements and see that coming down to zero.
Okay, not seeing anybody else. I've got David Fothergill and Mandy Chilcott, so I'll go to David first.
Thank you very much indeed. In light of the appalling decision by the Labour government to withdraw winter fuel payments from the vast majority of pensioners in this country, I'm delighted to see that Sir Ed Davies aligned himself with the view that that should be reviewed, and I hope that we would get our MP supporting that view when it does come to Parliament. My question is, in Somerset, that 110,000 people will now lose that winter fuel payment. 110,000 people. There is now a publicity campaign, and I'm delighted to see the social media campaign by the council encouraging people to apply for pension credits. It's estimated that 20% of people will apply for pension credits. 20% of 110,000 is just over 20,000 people, 22,000 people in Somerset. Can I just ask the question, are we modelling what the impact of that would be on services and on council tax and other revenue within this council? Because there is a big knock-on impact which the Labour government unfortunately has triggered.
This is such an interesting subject and a really critical one. Household Support Fund, why is nobody talking about that? We're not hearing about that. I think there are opportunities through the Household Support Fund for better targeting of winter fuel payment. My partner and I, because we're not married, never have been, we got a winter payment each of £250. So our tiny household
You get it even if you're married, Liz. That's not an excuse not to get married.
That's a different
You can still
argument. That's a different argument. I gave my share to the Salvation Army Food Bank. He gave his share to the local community centre for the soup kitchen. Those payments to us were not needed. That's my personal view. I've been in touch with 3 of our MPs for Somerset over last evening and this morning about how they feed into the Lib Dem position at Westminster about talking about the Household Support Fund and its critical importance. So it's through 23-24, it was something like 7.8 million in Somerset. That paid for the vouchers for free school meals during the holidays. It paid a huge amount of money through the Auriga portal. It put money with village agents who could reach people who are not online. So I think that everybody in Westminster needs to be talking about the two things together, actually. On council tax reduction scheme, this is something that came up at, it was scrutiny last week, wasn't it, when they looked at the consultation, and Richard Seeley told us that actually the winter fuel payment was not taken into account on the CTRS. So the council tax reduction scheme was not affected by those payments. That's good news. But I am with you, with Ed Davey, with everyone else, but I really, really hope that we talk about this in the round, that we don't just talk about the winter fuel payment and we forget the Household Support Fund, because that will be, I would use the word for a lot of people, it would be a disaster.
But if I can just come back, that was an interesting answer, but it just wasn't the answer I was looking for. My question is, have we started to model what the impact upon council tax reduction would be by a 20% uplift in those applying for pension credits?
And that bit, of course, anybody who's getting pension credits, that is in the government mandated part of the council tax reduction scheme. So you'll know that Richard Seeley's last day was last Friday. Sean Warren has taken over now. And so that is a really good prompt. And we will go to Sean and we will need to do some more work there. But I really hope that this new government gets their head around both things as quickly as possible. Not pay me anymore.
Can get married though. We'll all come, we'll all come.
Let's not unpick that one, is my advice. And, yes, certainly, we're also, in terms of our social media comms, supporting, the Children's Society in lobbying for the Household Support Fund as well. So just to add that one in. So I've got Mandy Chilcott next.
Thank you very much. Just picking up again, probably on my comments from a previous paper and one that Officer Hicks made. I just wonder again around public messaging when we look at this and the outturn together. I think that challenge with the finances aren't evident to all of our public. And I just wonder whether under these sort of the summary tables that we have, whether there should be on every one we produce a little note at the bottom to say this budget was put together using exit reserves and with that sort of government support. I just think it might help remind our residents that if we didn't have that, then our budget would have looked sort of very different. Just a suggestion moving forward from the public messaging.
Yeah, happy to take that away.
Thank you. And a couple of questions is regarding our debt collection. I think we're on all separate systems still from the district. So is that moving forward? Because I think that's caused some extra challenges for the finance team, both last year and this. And my second question actually was around adults. And whilst the figures sort of are just about balance, we have got those two big, and I can't bring the page up, the two figures at the top with adults. There are large swings in the budget around the residential and nursing, which has got a large underspend, 9.2 million, and the home care, a large overspend of 7 million. Now, the home care is sort of about a 25% difference, so it's quite a big difference. It's on page 245. So I'm just wondering, is there an interdependency between the two figures and whether it was worth sort of highlighting that? Thank you, Chair.
Liz on the first point and then Mel on the second point, I think.
So on the debt recovery through the Rebs and Bens service, and yes, we are obviously moving to one system, and that will be, we did cover this at the scrutiny meeting, that will be a phased move to the one new system, and that's based on risk. So wherever the risk is higher, that quarter of Somerset, so I think North moves first, and East will move last because that's part of the Capita contract. So there is a really clear movement of the 4 quarters. It's really interesting from all the emails that I receive. Some months ago, I received lots and lots of emails about overall debt from the 5 councils put together. And now I'm receiving lots of emails of people objecting to the recovery actions being taken. So they're both part of the same picture, of course. And, you know, we do need recovery action, of course we do, but it must be humane and it must be civilised. So I don't know if Nicola, you want to add anything more about the Rebs and Bens and the move to one system?
Not at this point, because actually this appendix in this report concentrates on sundry debtors. So just to answer the point, the sundry debtors are all on one system, so they're all on Dynamics. What we haven't got is that history of knowledge for the legacy debt to try to engage with that recovery, because we do try to get the services to take ownership of their debt. Because if they don't get the money in, we will take the money back out. If the debt has to be written off, it will come back out of the budget. So we do try to get that ownership, and I think that's where some of that is quite tricky when it's legacy debt and that knowledge has gone out of the authority. But that's what we're working on to then get a complete picture, because the auditors will be looking to us to ensure that we have the correct levels of write-off for any bad debt that was deemed irrecoverable.
So the differentiation you've got there is a mixture of two things. One, I want people to stay at home, and I don't want them to go into residential nursing, not because I don't necessarily want it, but people aren't looking forward to it. Therefore, we expect to see a reduction as per our the work that we've been doing through My Life, My Future to reduce that and increase the other. The other thing you'll see is we've actually put the savings target for My Life, My Future in there. So that reduction will start to come down as we make the money. So you'll start to see that. So there's two areas and we've put it all in the domiciliary care piece.
Thank you.
Okay, and councillor Osborne, so.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a couple of questions. My first one is relating to raising the the spending board limit from £100 to £500. Perhaps a little more on that. Would it not have been better to have kept in place the £100 limit for another 12 months, bearing in mind how finely balanced the finances are, to really embed and reinforce prudent behaviour in terms of spending and giving that challenge? So that work continues. Welcome that it's going to be monitored anyway. And also it's something that adults has clearly recognised from Councillor Wakefield's response earlier, that adults have set theirs at 300, which is probably a reasonable compromise between those two positions. My second question relates to adult social care and the observation that we are now getting an issue where people who are privately funding are starting to run out of money. So that means that we are going to have to take up the slack. Have we actually sort of done any modelling to quantify how many people we know about that is going to affect and what the likely cost is going to be? Because at the moment in Q1, yes, we are underspent, but we've got to go into winter, which could be a hard one. And that is when we may see more people come forward and more people start to run out of money. And in terms of debt, it's more a health warning, particularly with adult social care, that we have quite a few people who find themselves bereaved and they have to deal with the finances and the fallout. And I did have a case come to me recently where someone was trying to respond but wasn't getting a response back for us. So a little bit of compassion perhaps there. And in terms of prioritising, because someone who's newly bereaved or widowed could actually count as a vulnerable person if they weren't already so. And finally, on the Household Support Fund, is that likely to continue? I'm welcome that we're going to lobby government that if it is stopping, that that it should be continued, because it did a lot of valuable work, and particularly the Warm Spaces campaign, where it funded setting up village halls and other organisations to actually provide those warm spaces for people to go to. I'm conscious we've been very fortunate over the last 2 seasons. It's been very mild. But if we get a hard winter, that is when those spaces may come into their own.
Okay. I think on the Household Support Fund, the answer is we don't know yet, and that will remain the same. Duncan Sharkey.
Thank you. I'll pick up the £500 limit and the debt management in general, if that's right, and then maybe hand over to Mel Locke around the wealth depleter. So in terms of the £500 limit, there is a cultural implication. Effectively, we want to empower staff. We want staff to be able to lead their own budgets. And having such a tight limit was the right thing to do, but we do need to move away from that. What we're saying is we are moving away from that. It's not true that we've actually done that across the whole council. As you've already heard, a number of services have actually stuck with upper limits as they move things through. But what we want to make sure is that staff actually don't feel that we're micromanaging, because we do want to retain people, we do want to empower people, and actually, genuinely, we think that everyone should be the leader of their own job. We just need to get that consistent practice across the whole council that we didn't have to start with, obviously, as you'd imagine, from vesting day. So we're agreeing and we're moving away from the £100, but it will be very much up to individual directorates and managers to make sure they do that at the pace that works for them. But we want to give that messaging out. We need to manage that very carefully against, as has already been said, you could read some of the papers and think, oh, it's all really good right now. Actually, it is really good compared to the target we set, but that's a target to resolve a really difficult situation that we're still in. So we need to make sure we balance that properly and don't accidentally give people the wrong messages either way, if that makes sense. On debt management, I think it's fair to say right now, and I'll be corrected by colleagues, but we've inherited lots of different models around how we've managed debt historically. Obviously, some of it's back to 2018 and beyond. We've inherited different models on write-offs, etc. We've inherited different models on recovery action. One of the things I think we will want to look at as a council, and I know the leader has mentioned it to me a while ago, I don't know if you remember, Bill, but we did want to look at ethical recovery as well. So some predecessor councils very much were bailiff managed, and we've inherited those systems. But one of the things we'll want to look at across the whole piece is actually how we do debt recovery in the longer term. But I think what we need to get to now is, as Ms Hicks just said, we've got to get, well, we just turned back on the recovery activity in a significant way on the system. We need to run that through. We need to look at what debt we should be writing off. Doesn't mean we won't try and recover it still. It just means in accounting terms, we've taken a hit effectively for that loss. And then we need to think about collectively across the whole council, and this may or may not be for all of our debts because there are different types of debt are out there, what sort of recovery activity we want to see long term that benefits with our values and the aspirations within the council plan. So there's a big piece of work on debt recovery probably over the next 2 years to make sure we get into a place we're all happy with.
Yes, Sarah, then Mel.
Yes, just to say, I'm sure Mel will confirm this, that capital depletions are budgeted in for happening. And in fact, if you look at the figures, they're not really rising sharply at all at the moment. They do happen, and we are aware that they happen. I just wanted to say one thing about care homes and keeping people at home, which is what we want to do as much as possible. It's just a warning, really. If you put your relative or your spouse, or whoever it happens to be, into a care home that is more expensive than we will pay for, they will be moved by us because we will not be able to pay the rates, and your capital will drop more quickly if you do that. So if you keep people at home longer with the support that we will give you, that is less expensive for the council, but it's better for everybody, because otherwise there's a possibility they may go into a home and have to be moved at a later date because we can't afford the rates that you've agreed. And I just need people out there in the public to understand that we are a means tested service, and we will put people where we can afford to put them. Good homes, they're all good standard homes, but they may not be the one that you would have chosen or you've chosen when you had plenty of money. The other thing I'd remind people is we are a retirement part of the country. People retire down here. Quite usually they buy their own home when they come down here. So quite a lot of people do actually have homes that they've bought with their retirement. They've paid off their mortgage, they come down here and buy a home. So it's not, the capital drop thing isn't, as far as I'm aware, a huge risk. Mel may not agree with that.
It's changed. So absolutely, as we hold the price of care that we have, they obviously have to pass that on to the self-funder market. And we know self-funder market rates went up between 10 and 15% this year. Ours went up by 3.3. So, there's a differentiation in there. We saw last year an additional 100 people come through that scheme. We know we're monitoring it month on month on month. So we know roughly where we are, what we're likely to get. However, and you're absolutely right, not just because of the cost, because we can't just move people because of cost, but if we can meet individuals' needs in another home, at the fee level that we can afford, of course we can do that, and we are doing that, which is causing quite a lot of complaints coming in. And I know from families and to yourselves, you hear that very regularly, that complaints come in, why they move in it, but ultimately we can only do what we can do. So we manage that if the individual's needs can be met in a different place at the costs that we can manage, then yes, we are moving people. And I think we're probably moving people about probably 10 people a month at this moment in time across from one to another.
Seeing any other comments or questions? So did you want to come back?
Yes, it's just a point of clarification, because we've sort of talked in terms of people running out of money in care homes, and you've answered that question. Thank you, Mel. But how many people are having to come to us for the domiciliary side, the home care side of it, because again, they're running out of funding to be able to pay for their own packages?
Not that many, I think, but that's not the area of spend that we're worrying about, because they get other income to come in to do that. So we're not seeing that as much. It tends to be those that are in care homes.
Okay, thank you. On no list, we're moving on to the recommendations, but on just there was a very curious reference to Hurlstone Bothy in recommendation B, and I wonder whether just someone could give me a 2-sentence explanation as to what that recommendation is before we vote on it.
I can tell you it's a former Somerset Western Taunton earmarked reserve of monies that were put aside for improvements to the Bothy, which is the building you'll see if you walk out to the end of Hurlstone Point. And this is releasing that money for those improvements to be made under coastal services. So I recommend the walk.
Okay, I wish I could walk that far at the moment, so I'll look forward to being able to do that next summer maybe.
Chair, can I just apologise that there was no reference to that in the report, which there should have been. There's a few things I'm picking up about this report for the team's clarity.
That's fine. I did. I was just doing a search just to double check that I hadn't missed something in my reading of it. That's fine. So we have 2 recommendations: that we note the forecast underspend of 0.2 million for the year, and we agree to draw 0.025 million from the Hurlstone Bothy earmarked reserve for the Coastal Revival Fund. That's 0.017 million to property services under strategic asset management, and 0.008 million to community services under regulatory and operational services. Can I have a proposer for that? Thank you, Liz. Can I have a seconder? Thank you very much, Councillor Shearer. Those in favour, those against, and that is clearly carried. And we will take a comfort break there for 10 minutes. Thank you very much, and move on to item 13, which is the Somerset Council Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act. It falls to me to introduce this item. We apparently have the authority to use covert surveillance, which is something that I didn't know about until this came along on the agenda. So yeah, the covert surveillance is a secret. It's oxymoronic, isn't it? Anyway, to comply with the legislation, we need the authorisation by a senior appropriately trained officer, and in certain circumstances, approval by a magistrate. And to comply with the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, the council must have its procedures in place to ensure that any covert surveillance it undertakes is necessary and proportionate and is properly authorised. And the legislation is underpinned by a number of statutory codes of practice. The council can use its powers for the investigation of offences. Evidence obtained through covert means will only be admissible in court if it has been obtained in accordance with the provisions of the Act and the statutory codes. So the revised code of practice on covert surveillance and property interference provides that in addition to having a policy covering its use of covert surveillance, a local authority must have their Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act policy approved by its elected members annually. The Investigatory Powers Commission provides independent oversight of use of the powers, and local authorities are required to provide annual statistics to the Investigatory Powers Commission on their use of the powers, including any use of a covert human intelligence source, and are typically inspected every 3 years. Somerset was inspected in April. That's all I have. Can I just hand over if Leslie Dolan would like to add anything more? I'd particularly be fascinated to know how often we use covert surveillance in any of our operations, and whether this is a power we use extensively.
I can certainly answer that last question very easily, Chair. The 5 authorities, so that's the former local authorities and the former county council, there's been no use of these powers in the last few years, and that matter has been reported through the annual statistics. What I would like to say is that it may not be possible to carry out covert surveillance that is authorised by RIPA. There is a threshold there for local authorities, and a RIPA authorisation relates to the investigation of an offence where there is at least a minimum sanction of 6 months imprisonment in the event that the offender is found guilty. That doesn't mean to say that covert surveillance cannot be carried out in accordance with RIPA. If it doesn't reach the threshold, you can carry it out, but you obviously have to be very careful about looking at whether it's proportionate and necessary. And it's recommended that in those circumstances, all the same questions that you are asked or required to answer in regard to a RIPA authorisation are asked in regard to a non-RIPA authorisation.
Anything to add, David? No. Anything from members of the executive? Okay, I've got Richard and then Heather.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, you said that the five the five previous authorities have not used the covert. Has anyone applied to use it and failed?
Not in the last 5 years, and certainly in my tenure as a former employee of Mendip, there were applications that were never refused. The idea there is obviously before bringing an application to an authorised officer to sign off, there is consultation with legal and various other people to make sure that what you are actually bringing is something that is going to be approved. And going on from there, the approval by the authorised officer needs judicial approval as well. So once you get your approval from the authorised officer, that's not the end. You have to trot off to the magistrates and persuade a magistrates court to authorise it, and that covert surveillance can't start until you get that judicial approval.
Hello.
Hi, thank you so much. And as an ex-Mendip person, I got my head around this particular set of legislation. I had to then, but I think I just want to say I think it is an incredibly important and reassuring piece of legislation, because it would be very easy for us if we had access to CCTV and so on to overstep marks. And I think there's often, as in my old role, you know, members of the public say, well, why can't you just put a camera up there and catch that person doing this? And that was, and that was a serial offender, literally a serial offender, who dropped grain to feed pigeons. And that absolutely made people completely demented around the town where it happened, and was very, very frustrating. But you say, no, we can't just put a camera up to catch, you know, to do that. And I think it's probably, unfortunately, it left a nuisance in the street for a while, but I do think it's the right thing, that we shouldn't be allowed to just willy-nilly think, oh, we might catch that person doing something, so we'll stick a camera up. Frustrating as it is, especially with any antisocial behaviour or fly tipping and so on, you have to be so careful. So I just wanted to say it's nice to be assured that we haven't used it, although it might be frustrating. We have to get creative about other ways of solving problems in our towns and communities.
Chair, if I could just comment on that. The reason why we have to do it is because obviously the covert surveillance is going to impact on private lives, and there is a potential to gather collateral intrusion or collateral information, and therefore we wish to safeguard ourselves against any claims for breaches of the Human Rights Act. So that's why RIPA is needed.
Sarah?
Yeah, could I just ask a question? Because I can understand that the security cameras that we have in town centres are police controlled, I think. I don't think they're ours. I don't think they are. Well, they are. All right. Well, I don't know. Yeah. Perhaps somebody could explain the difference. But for this, I mean, can you give an example? For example, if somebody was continually dumping asbestos waste or something in the same place, we knew it was carrying on, you might want to find out who was doing it if you couldn't find out by other means, or if they were stealing park benches across the county, that sort of thing. Is that what we mean?
general town centre CCTV is not covered by this piece of legislation. It's covered by the Protection of Freedoms Act, where a code of practice similar to the codes of practice under RIPA are in force and are required to be adhered to by public authorities, the police, who are working under that piece of legislation. We had a situation in Mendip where we wanted to erect covert cameras in the hope that we would be able to identify those who were fly tipping in a particular area. They were covert cameras, and so before being able to install those, we had to go through the RIPA process, the internal process of getting sign-off by an authorised officer, and then off to the magistrates' court. Unfortunately, on that occasion, it came to nothing because the cameras were stolen.
Yes.
Okay. Not seeing anything else from lead members, social lead members. Mandy.
So this is just a lack of knowledge questions. Hopefully you can help. So I watch a lot of TV programmes, perhaps around fraud, for example, with councils, and there is quite a lot of covert work done. Are we saying everything like that would have to go through this process? I'm trying to think of practical applications where it might be needed for a council.
If we are talking about fraud and fraud by employees at the council, there has been a very specific tribunal case where it has been judicially stated that RIPA is not intended for non-core business of the council, which of course investigation of benefit fraud by employees is. So it wouldn't be covered by that.
So we could do it, but it's not covered by this. Is that what we're saying?
That's correct, yes. But again, as I said earlier, if you were going to do it, you would have to go through and identify whether it's necessary and proportionate, and you'd have to ask yourself all the questions you would be asking for the non-regulated RIPA as though it was a RIPA.
Thank you. And Councillor John Hunt online. Good morning, John, or good afternoon, rather.
I feel like I should address you as Q in this particular case, Bill. And I'll be Councillor James Bond for the morning. I think I have to say I've never heard of this at all. My question is a fairly simple one. Covert, it means secret or hidden. I'm a little concerned that if we did actually want to take up any covert CCTV or whatever it might be, fly tipping, for example, we have to go to, from what I've heard this morning, is that we have to go to the magistrates' court or get permissions from officers, etc. Doesn't that rather give advance warning to the person or people that we're trying to catch?
Potentially, but unlikely is my answer to that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. And Mark?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I hope you can hear me. Isn't this an annual thing, though, where annually this has to be discussed, even though the council may not want to use it, but it's repetitive? Have I got that right?
No, that is correct, Councillor. The codes of practice say that whilst members are not involved in the operational side of the RIPA authorisations, it is advisable, or it's more than advisable, they should be asked to review the policy on an annual basis. So it's intended to bring the policy back initially to scrutiny and then back to this committee every year.
Okay, any more questions, comments or observations? Not seeing any. Okay, so we have before us a recommendation to note the contents of the report and to note the outcome of the recent inspection by the Investigatory Powers Commission, to note the use of the authority's powers under RIPA for the period of 3 years prior to the formation of the Unitary Council for the period 23-24 and thereafter, that the use of the powers be reported to the Executive on an annual basis, and recommend to full council that the former county council's covert surveillance policy attached to this report be readopted as amended as the RIPA policy for Somerset Council. and agree and note that the council's policy at recommendation 4 above will be reviewed, indeed annually, by the executive. Can I see a proposer for that? Yep.
When the report went to scrutiny beforehand, scrutiny asked if they could be involved in that annual review as well. So corporate resources scrutiny, so that can be addressed by a simple amendment to recommendation 5, so it's reviewed annually by corporate resources scrutiny and by the executive.
I'm happy for that to be a drafting amendment and to be incorporated into the recommendation, so that number 5 will read annually by the corporate scrutiny committee and the executive. Yep, are we all happy with that drafting amendment? Those proposer, please. Heather, seconder, Sarah. Those in favour, please. Those against, that's clearly carried. Okay. And lastly, we have item 14 on our agenda, which is the Somerset Strategic Alcohol and Drug Partnership annual report. This summarises the work that the Somerset Drug and Alcohol Partnership's done during 23-24. It's a multi-agency partnership. It seeks to increase the quality and capacity of specialist treatment support we provide as a system to the population of Somerset, and it has 3 external grants which go towards the service. In the first year of the work, the partnership strengthened multi-agency working. This report articulates the work in year 2 and is focused on the criminal justice system and getting people into treatment rather than incarceration. Particularly in introducing this, I just like to refer back to I attended the peer support presentation of those graduates of the Somerset Drug and Alcohol Service Partnership, and we saw some really moving testimonies from people who directly benefited and participated in that project. It was absolutely inspirational to go and listen to those experiences, and it was also it's something that's affected me personally as well. So it was something that was close to my heart as well. I can pass on to Abby if you want to take the next section.
It's okay. Afternoon, everyone. I am conscious of time, so I am going to be very brief. But I'd just like to thank you for the opportunity to highlight the work of the partnership. This has been through adults and health scrutiny, so I am just going to give you a quick overview. I know most of you have read the report. So this is the context, really. There was a recognition that we were criminalising people rather than treating people who use substances. And there was a 10-year drug strategy published, and I think it's worthy to note that that was cross-party supported, so we're not anticipating any significant changes with changing government, hopefully. Funding was released to local authorities in 2022, as the leader articulated, in the form of 3 grants. We don't yet know what will happen to those grants in March 25, and that is about sort of increased by 50% the public health grant funding we have for those services, so it is very significant. Next slide, please. So when we went through scrutiny, it was actually Councillor Wakefield that said, well, can you articulate the scale of this problem? Because after we described it, I think members were left feeling that maybe we had a really significant problem. I think we do. We do have about 5,000 people who are dependent on alcohol. That is using alcohol to such an extent that really significantly impairs daily life. And we have 2,250 opiate and crack users. To put that into context, that's 1 in 100 people in a village that are dependent on alcohol. 11 of those people in that village would be smokers. So it's still proportionate to smoking. It's still not on that scale, but it's still visible, as Bill said, in many of our communities, in many of our families, and in many of our teams, actually. So as an employer, we need to think about this. Next slide, please. So I think the thing about substance use is that it doesn't really just affect one service. So when the national strategy was published, we gathered together local partners, and across the board, everyone's been really supportive of this agenda. And we identified themes within Somerset that were challenging different parts of the system. And the national strategy is a drug only strategy, but locally we have included alcohol in our strategy and in our work. And the main reason for that is we're an outlier for hospital admissions as a result of alcohol, both for children and for adults. Our priorities, next slide please, are in 4 work streams, and all the work we've undertaken in those areas is articulated in the report. But as Bill was saying, he went to the peer supporter graduation, and those are people who have been through specialist treatment. They're on their recovery journey, and they are then giving back. They're supporting people through their treatment journey. And currently, those individuals are meeting people at the gates of prison and bringing them back to Somerset and settling them into their house and making sure they have their script. And so those peer supporters are absolutely people that can work with individuals. I don't know what it feels like to be in that position, but those people do, and they walk alongside the people that are in treatment, and that is really helping. And the other thing they are doing is they're sat in DWP actually. And so for people that are out of work, often because of ill health, peer supporters are sat in DWP and giving people hope that by using substances, it doesn't make you unemployable. Actually, lots of our smaller local employers are very supportive of people accessing AA in the community around their job. And that might be something as a council we would want to look at. So recovery is a part of this. It's not just the treatment aspects. Next slide, nearly there. Most government grants come with targets, don't they? And I thought you'd be pleased or concerned to see how we're doing on the targets that were set for us. So the national grant was decided in 2022. We received the money in September 22, and it was against a baseline set in 2021. And we had to increase the number of adults in treatment by 20%. For those of you who remember, December 21 was the back end of the pandemic, and our service had taken a decision in consultation with ourselves not to discharge vulnerable individuals at a time where there was minimal support for them in community. So our baseline in 2021 is sort of really high, whereas a lot of other areas just discharged a lot of people. So we had an artificially high baseline, which then normalised, and the pale blue dotted line is our trajectory line, and you can see we are some way from it. But this July, we did some work with the NHS. We had stalls in both hospital lounge receptions, and we've smashed our alcohol referrals in July to such an extent that actually the service could almost not cope with the demand around alcohol referrals. So we know that we can do this, and we are on track to hit that trajectory by March 25. But strategically, we took the decision, rather than go for low-hanging fruit and just pick people up, get them into treatment and out the other end to tick a box, we have deliberately targeted those most vulnerable individuals, those people in contact with the criminal justice system, who are harder to engage, who do have higher need, but absolutely deserve this service.
Can you explain what's the difference between the two?
Oh, the two graphs. I need to put my glasses on.
What does it say? What?
They are exactly the same, so. So they are both graphs, sorry for that, just showing how we're progressing against our trajectory, and the dark blue line is the numbers in treatment adults. If we go to the next slide though, it's not only about numbers in treatment, it's actually about the quality of treatment. And you can sit in treatment and nothing therapeutic happen and count. We're really determined that people are given a chance at completing their treatment. And these are different graphs. The one on the left is Somerset has the pale blue line is significantly higher successful completion rate in treatment without representation. And on the right hand side, there's a new measure that shows for those adults that are in treatment if they're making substantial progress. And that includes an assessment of their housing status, which is a bit of a challenge. But again, Somerset is doing better than national average on that measure. So although we're a bit wide of the trajectory, we are delivering really high quality treatment, which enables people to get into recovery. Next slide, please. And that's just a brief overview of what you can find in more detail in the report.
Thank you, Alison. And Federica.
Thank you, Chair. In relation just to the presentation, Alison, I just got a couple of questions, and sorry if I didn't locate it in the report. One was around the fact that we say in the numbers that I think Sarah asked for at scrutiny that it's for adults in relation to alcohol, but then we include 15-year-olds when it's opiates. And I just didn't know whether or not we do, what support we give for under 18s in relation to alcohol, because it looks like there was a difference in age range, if that makes sense. And then the second question is, what can we do as councillors, or what we need to do as a council in relation to that, working with businesses to give people who are going through this process a chance and help them back into employment? Is that something that we need to do through our business board, or how do we reach out to businesses to say, actually, you know, we've got people, and actually, are we doing something as an organisation ourselves, both to support our staff who maybe need this treatment, and secondly, to employ people that perhaps have gone through this process?
Okay, thank you for the questions, Councillor Smith-Roberts. So the first question is the differentiation in support for adults and for children. So the Children Young People Service supports children up to 25 if they've been in care or have special educational needs. So that's the slight difference in the age cut-offs. And because we have an all-age service, it isn't at a point in time you're discharged and handed over to the next service. So the service can support that, each individual, in a flexible way and maintain the level of support. That wasn't the case until a few years ago. In terms of the specific question about support for alcohol, there is support for children and young people with their alcohol use, but I think I'm right in saying we don't actually have any children and young people dependent on alcohol. I will double check though. It tends to be misuse, chaotic use, and how we're trying to reach those individuals is a universal approach, actually giving messages through schools.
No, go away.
That wasn't me, was it? Okay. Oh, yes.
Apologies, it was me.
Okay. So we're working really closely with colleagues in Children and Young People Services, but also recognising there's a lot of children that are not engaged in school, and we need to reach those in more creative ways. So that's the first question. There is a significant chunk of children and young people, proportion children and young people that are choosing not to drink alcohol now. The second question around businesses and employers, to be honest, the amount of work we could do on this agenda is vast, and actually we have to, that's exactly the word, prioritise. We haven't yet really picked up the work around employers and businesses, but actually if there was an appetite and a vehicle that we could successfully do that, then I could get one of the team to make contact.
Thank you. Go to Heather next and then Val.
Hi, thank you, and thanks for the report. It's really good to see it all. There's such a lot of good work. I mean, the adults, so the drugs and alcohol thing seems to be such a key element in most of the wicked issues we all have to deal with for some of our most vulnerable families and children. So it's really nice to see the report. I Federica's touched on some of the questions I had, which is around understanding some more. You've clearly got a lot of data. There's a limit to what you can put in a report, but it would have been nice to see more of the breakdowns between young people and adults in some of the data that's there, so we understand it. You had some in for younger people, and I think the young people, that's really good. I think similarly, if you've got the data to understand how many of those people we're supporting, or perhaps care leavers or with care experience, because again, from a protective characteristic thing, that's a really helpful thing for us to understand. So that'd be really nice to have. And I guess as well, because I was kind of looking at all, especially with thinking of things like the prevention agenda, which is so important, the early intervention. I didn't know whether your report might have covered the work that I know that you're doing with across the partnership with on children's safeguarding, for instance, because again, the alcohol thing is such, and drugs thing is such a big part of that. So more information on that would be grand. And then just for myself, because I didn't understand, and forgive me, there were a couple of meetings that I just didn't get to see you in, because I came in late. I think you were all going out of scrutiny when I came in. I could only be there for some of it, on adults and health. There was also one about the, I think it's the placements, what they're described as. I think there was something actually in the report itself saying that these independent placement supports, we couldn't take advantage of this because we didn't have the money or the funding or the resources. So, but I didn't really understand what that was. So I'd like to understand a bit more, please.
Okay, so just for clarity, currently there's 164 children and young people being supported by the treatment service, and I can of course provide a breakdown of numbers. So I think that answers that question. In terms of the family safeguarding model, I think Claire and I have been on a journey for a great number of years, starting with a hidden harm needs assessment and saying actually a more preventative approach to preventing children and young people from coming into care or ending up on a child protection plan is address parental factors in the household. So that was the genesis behind funding the family safeguarding model, which Children's Services colleagues fund, and those workers, the 8 substance use workers from the specialist service, are embedded in the social work teams, and they work with adults. And there's 8 mental health workers as well, I think, embedded. Yeah, domestic abuse as well. So that's that question. And then the trouble is this field is so complicated. So the placements are around alcohol detoxification. So the worst thing you can do to someone who's dependent on alcohol is to tell them to stop alcohol immediately, because it will send them into a catastrophic set of events that will hospitalise them. So never tell someone who's drinking too much to stop. Tell them to reduce and get help. But to medically detox someone, many people will need medical supervision, and we don't have any provision for that in Somerset. So we have a consortium across the sort of North Somerset and South Gloucestershire and Bristol, and we fund beds at Southmead Hospital and in North Somerset at Broadway Lodge. But I have got agreement from the Acute Trust here, and I've got a little pot of money where we might try and pilot those placements in our local hospital. That will help individuals, because if you're a mum or a dad, or if you're holding down a job and you're asked to go to Manchester to undertake medical detox, well, it's really not going to work for you. And actually you need the support of your loved ones around you, your family and your friends, to really make it successful. So the doctor's strike got in the way of progressing that, but we finally met in June and we have agreement, and we're really hopeful that we can actually build capacity. And that's not only a bed, but actually psychiatrists have stopped doing any training in addiction psychiatry, because it's all in private provision now. And so actually we need to train the next generation of psychiatrists in supporting individuals. Otherwise we are going to have a skills gap longer term. So it's, and then there's a similar conversation about rehab, but that's also complicated, and we don't have any provision here for that. So
thank you so much. That's really helpful to get that level of detail. That's really, no, it's very, very helpful. I appreciate it. I just want one comment and one question. The comment is, I'm glad you reminded me of the kind of that awful threesome of the mental health issues, domestic abuse or any kind of exploitation, if you like, and alcohol and drugs. Those three, that's why I think it's so key to work in that partnership way. So it's really good that we're doing that work. The other question was though about on slide 5, which I think was the one about, giving the date, the percentages of those people who are affected. I noticed that the dates there, the latest data we've got, 2019, 2020. Do you think those numbers will have gone up by now?
The opiate data is modelled, so they take, tell me if I'm going into too much detail. So they take a section of the prison population of Somerset residents, our mortality data and general data from our treatment service. And they say how many of each of those populations are opiate or crack users. And then they apply that to the whole population. We believe that's an overestimate. And so we don't think it's useful, but the alcohol methodology has changed and it did go up a little bit. But we know during COVID, people who had a dependence on alcohol used more alcohol. Many people who don't have a dependent relationship with alcohol actually drink less during COVID. So we're waiting to see that through on the data, and we're dependent on national data for that because we need to compare ourselves with other areas.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Keach online. Good afternoon, Val.
Thank you. My apologies. For some reason, my camera seems to have disappeared. And I apologise for my intervention earlier. I wasn't saying go away to people here. I was saying go away to one of my puppies. It's a question really and a comment. Obviously, with my working background, I'm delighted to see this report. Have we done any research on the numbers of people coming out of prison, which will increase with the 40% people doing 40% of their sentence? And also, how closely do we work with the prison and probation service when people are coming out of custody? Because I know that with 88,000 people currently in our prisons, the actual lack of a paucity of treatment programs in prisons is much less than it used to be. And I just wondered if we've got any idea as how that is affecting us, because obviously a percentage of those people will come back to Somerset. And I just wondered how closely we're working with certainly the resettlement teams in the prisons and the probation service, who will be responsible for supervising some of those people, not all of them. It depends on the length of sentence.
Val, Alison.
Yeah, thank you, Val. The answer is broadly yes, but in more detail, one of the other targets of this grant is that 47% of people that leave prison carry on their treatment once they arrive in the community in Somerset. We've got a whole little working group that straddles the prison, predominantly Exeter, but also Portland and the women's prison up in South Gloucestershire. And they work really closely. We set up a specific team within the drug and alcohol service to support people coming through the prison system and work closely with probation. So Ashley, new head of probation, actually has a drug and alcohol background, and he's really passionate about this. And the key thing is to try not to get people into prison in the first place. So we've been working with the courts and the prison and the judiciary to make sure that more people are getting the opportunity to have a kind of a community sentence, like a drug rehab order or an alcohol treatment order. And that's far more successful than getting people into prison, because that isn't always a great experience. And for those that do go to prison and won't sign up to the treatment order, they often have a real opportunity to start treatment, and we owe it to them to carry that on. So I think we're trying really hard to make that work. Sometimes individuals vote with their feet and tell us they're coming back to us and then go to Dorset instead so they can hide. That is their right, but we want to give them the opportunity.
Okay, thank you, Alison.
Thank you. I've got Dave Wone online. I see you put something in the chat, Dave. Is there anything else you add to that?
Not especially. I just wanted to speak up just to make sure the notes in the chat box have been received, because there's a big opportunity there. As I've written in the chat box, we go out to, at the moment, I think 12,000 plus businesses through the medium of the business newsletter, in addition to other engagement methods. And I'd be happy to pick this up with Paul Hickson and James Gilchrist to try and help with that business engagement piece.
I think we can take that point away. I think it's an excellent point, well made. Sarah?
Okay.
Just wanted to say how much we appreciated Alison and her team all coming to the Adults Health and Scrutiny and giving us a really good rundown of what work they'd done. And it's fantastic. We were so impressed by them. They answered all our questions really helpfully. So I would like to thank you and the team for all the work you're doing. It really matters to us and it's really great. Thank you.
Just not seeing any other contributions, Mr. Sharkey.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Just a really minor point, Alison, just on recommendation 7 about the drug and alcohol death review process. Can we just make sure we tie that up with all the other death review processes we've got? I know you're aware of this, but we've got significant pressures on things like domestic homicide reviews and the cost of those. And I think when you look at them, we modelled the same process in every single one of those types of reviews we do. And it's turned out to quite an expensive process. So maybe there's a way of bringing some things together and doing differently. But I know you'll be all over that. I just thought I'd mention it though.
Yes, as ex-chair of Child Death Overview Panel for many years, but many of them are statutory, so we have to try and sometimes be creative. We're on it already.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing anybody else indicating. So just take us through the recommendations that the executive endorse the content of the report and support the Somerset Drug and Alcohol Partnership focus areas for 24-25, targeting and supporting people who've been using alcohol to problematic levels and not accessing treatment, targeting people within the criminal justice system, reaching the continuity of care target of 47%, people successfully transitioning from custody-based treatment to community treatment, piloting a local detoxification initiative, evolving lived experience initiatives, raising awareness of recovery support in all communities, developing a multi-agency drug and alcohol deaths review process, bearing in mind the comments of Mr. Sharkey, and implementing the local drug intelligence system to facilitate a prompt response to any contaminated drugs in Somerset. Can I see a proposer for that? That's Councillor Wilkins, secondly Councillor Federica Smith-Roberts. Those in favour, please. Those against, thank you very much. Alison, thank you to you and to all the team that are involved in this for this really fascinating report, and it reaches out to so many areas of our work. It is really appreciated. Thank you. Okay, so it remains for me to advise you that the next meeting of the executive is Monday, October the 7th, which will be again held here in the John Meikle room at Dean House. The meeting is therefore closed. The estimated completion was 1:30 and I note that it's 1:15. So can I thank you so much for everyone's ability to be able to keep on time with their comments, questions and observations. Thank you very much everyone for your attendance. Thank you. Bye-bye.